Harry Potter, Dimensional Wizard. Chapter 201 Project Uranus. After returning home, Edward ignored the complaints of his wives of why he did not take them on a vacation in the universe. It's not his fault that they decided to ignore him. So, he went straight to work to busy himself. He visited the Flamels Tower to work on Project Uranus, the floating city. This project can be considered as one of the most important projects of the Empire. Once done, Edward will finally have a real deterrent against Tier 9 galaxy individuals. As for whether it can affect Tier 10 Universal, in theory, it should, but only in theory. Once he arrived at the tower, he saw a lot of remodeling was done since the last time he came. All the wandcraft and dragon language enchantments that were engraved in all of the city were removed. The core engravement was used to place all the enchantments together inside a pocket dimension. That way, it could function more smoothly and reduce the possibility of the enchantments behind being destroyed during battle or confrontations. There were 2 core engravements. The first one was used to deal with the average control of the city. Things like anti-gravity, shield, environment or atmospheric control, FLT travel, energy distribution, weapons system, etc. The second core engravement was for the enchantments needed to travel to other universes. Edward and Nicholas Flamel were responsible for this part. After a few weeks, they finished the engravement. Next was the shield that surrounded the city. The shield had to work as both a defensive measure and also protect the people living in the city from the void. Since void energy is very destructive, this part was very important. So, 2 methods were used to deal with the problem. The first one was to create a dome made of magicium since it is the only metal that can protect from the void. The second method was the void shield that Edward developed to deal with truth. Once both these methods were built, Edward took the city to the void for a test. And after finding a few errors, he returned to fix them. The next problem to deal with was the energy core of the floating city. The Philosopher's Stone was still used as the main energy source, however, Edward also knew that there might be some places where mana did not work. So, an alternate form of energy was needed. So, he used the Empire's technology to create an artificial star as energy. Furthermore, he placed energy converter enchantments that allowed heat from the star to turn into mana, and mana to heat. After building this aspect of the city, Edward's paranoia got the best of him again and he decided to make the city work on all kinds of energy just in case. So, whether it was nuclear power, electricity, tectonic energy, psychic energy, or even cosmic energy. Unfortunately, the research on the latter was not completed yet, so, the result was not satisfactory to him. Finally, Edward focused on the weapon system. This time, he needed Rowena's help to finish this. So, how is the void cannon? The floating city has many different weapons like high-energy lasers, railguns, nukes, space-based weapons, gravity bombs. There are also magical weapons like fiendfire cannons, time bombs, dimension collapse cannons, and elemental riot cannons. However, none of them are more powerful or as deadly as the void cannon. There are many problems with the new design e.c. What problem? After firing a few shots, the void energy will destroy the cannon itself. I thought you found a way to enclose it into a case? That was the previous model. In my latest research, I have found a way to gather a higher concentration of void energy. And the magicium case cannot contain it. Rowena showed him the new data that she discovered before continuing. I tried placing the void energy inside a pocket dimension before shooting it. However, it even destroyed the dimension. Edward frowned after hearing this. Right now, the dimension technology of the Empire involves 2 aspects. One is to take an already existing space and enlarged it with the extension curse. Then, separate that dimension from its encasing. For example, a suitcase has a small space inside. After expanding the internal dimension, an arcanist can separate that internal dimension from the suitcase to exist on its own, or bind it to another object like a ring. This is one of the ways interdimensional rings are created. Another method is to use Father's method to cut off an entire pocket dimension from the space-time continuing, thus existing in the realm between reality and non-reality. However, no matter what method is used, as long void energy entered these pocket dimensions, they will be corroded and destroyed. How is your research on using void energy to create a new or as we did with the Philosopher's Stone and Magicium? Still in progress. Edward's mind quickly functioned as he pondered a solution to this problem. Could you create the pocket dimension with the void energy? Muttered Rowena as she began to think. Void energy contained many attributes with time and space being one of the main ones. If we can isolate or remove these other attributes, it should be quite easy to create a dimension with them. No, it would be better to use these attributes to reinforce the main ones. After having a direction to go with, Rowena began to design the new void cannon. Once she was done, she had to leave as she reached the threshold to advance to Tier 5. So, Edward and the Flamels had to do the finishing touch. After more than a year, everything was completed. Edward floated in the air as he looked at this masterpiece of his. He flew over different parts of the city. There were a few towers for research with the main one very noticeable. There was the golem factory section to create robots or golems for either war or other activities. There was the clone factory section that was next to the army training camp. There was the fleet manufacturing section to create space legions, the civilian section for people to live and relax, the library, and many more. The floating city was designed as a civilization restarter of the Arcane Empire. In case something happened, as long as it still exists, the entire civilization can be rebuilt once more from scratch. As Edward looked at the entire thing, he became more secure in his future voyage. From now on, no matter what situation he faced in the future, he was more confident with the floating city. And he was not the only one excited. Nicholas Flamel was also very happy with the final result. He had long guessed of his identity as a possible clone of a powerful figure. He did not care, not suddenly wanted to revolt against the original version. However, he still had an obsession, to make an achievement that was better than the original version who created the Philosopher's Stone. And to him, this floating city was more than comparable. I suddenly had the urge to go kill Herpo, muttered Edward. However, he quickly removed this idea from his mind. With the floating city, even if Herpo regained his full power, he would not be his match. It's better to continue the plan I previously for him, said Edward slowly before looking in the distance. He sneered. It's about time that things between us came to an end. Chapter 202 Legacy. In the afterlife dimension, Herpo has been in a pretty bad mood recently. The only thing that brought the slightest joy to him was the fact that the leyline nodes have started to be activated. However, Herpo also knew that for his plans to succeed, he still has to face a major obstacle. He sat on a throne with a book in his hand, checking every soul that entered the afterlife and ensuring that they were sent in the appropriate place. Suddenly, he felt something and raised his head. His eyes seemed to ignore space until he saw the artificial island that Academy City was located on. He focused on one of the towers. What has this wizard done now? A great sense of dread suddenly overcame him. His instinct was warning him to run as far away as possible, otherwise, he would die. Fear of death suddenly overcame this death god. It was unfortunate that Herpo could not see what was inside that tower. And even if he could, he would not dare peep again. So, he started walking back and forth, pondering what to do. In the end, he decided to reinforce the defense of this dimension to prevent other people from easily entering. Herpo knew that these measures were probably useless as he was aware that Edward was trying to invent a way to travel to other dimensions. And based on the fact that he vanished more than 5 years ago, he most likely succeeded. Based on his current strength, Herpo did not know whether his actions were useful. So, after sighing to himself, he decided to always be on guard. In a separate dimension outside of time and space, an old man stood in front of a log house looking in the distance while caressing his long beard. His eyes seemed to contain both space and time as he watched Edward finish the floating city. "Outta boy," he said with a smile on his face. "I did not expect to see a floating city in a place like this," said a female voice next to him. It was as if she was always there and just appeared at the same time. After Morgana said these words, she was lost in memories. She saw a floating city that was larger than any universe, killing a bunch of strange and hideous creatures. "It's a shame that the Arcane Emperor died, he was a great ally." "You're right about that," replied Merlin, who also had a look of remembrance. "It's all right as long as his legacy is passed on. Do you think your boy can inherit his title?" To beings like them, Edward's random use of the title of Arcane Emperor, creating the Arcane Empire and creating a floating city is not random at all, but a form of legacy inheritance. Maybe one day, when he becomes more powerful, he will understand these things. If he wants to, he still has a long to go. Thinking about the Arcane Emperor, Merlin had to sigh that such a genius had fallen. This was a great blow to their cause. Morgan was silent for a moment. "Do you think we can hold on until these young people grow up?" "I don't think we have a choice," replied Merlin with a sigh. "Luckily, we have discovered primordial Earth. With the talent of these Earthlings, it is easier and faster to train powerful individuals. Otherwise, the front line would not hold for so long. I still think we should just send all the people on primordial Earth to different universes. With their talents, even if only 1% of them reached our heights, we still have a chance at surviving. The people from there will never allow us to intervene on such a large scale in their world. Plus, you should also understand is the more we forcibly intervene there, the more changes will occur in that dimension. We are already lucky to discover it and use it as a talent-gathering pool. There is no need to destroy a good thing for quick success." Morgana did agree with this decision. Unfortunately, she was incapable of changing the decision of so many people at the same level as her. Then, she suddenly said, "Why don't you let me train that Edward boy? Why are you so suddenly interested in my disciple?" "Well, this boy has done so many shady things in his magical path, I think his temperament is best suited for a person like me." Merlin looked at her up and down. "Did I say something wrong?" she said with a sneer. Despite all Arthur has gone through, despite experiencing so many different lives, despite how powerful he became, he still has such a rigid, black and white view of the world. And a lot of this has to do with you. So, it's best to let me train Edward. Merlin was silent for a moment before sighing out loud. He indeed was responsible for how that boy turned out. He never let him experience the dark sides of the world, turning him into a truly righteous person, and when he realized something was wrong and wanted to correct it, it was already too late. You are right. And this is the reason that I'm taking a free-range approach with Edward. As long as he does not lose himself in the pursuit of knowledge, I will not intervene. As for you, I will not let you interfere as well. All your apprentices are twisted beyond measures. He, laughed Morgana with a little embarrassment. I cannot wait for these two to meet one another. I doubt that they will get along well. Merlin's lips twitched slightly without saying anything else. Edward's timeline. After creating the floating city, he did many tests in the void to fix some issues. Finally, after another 3 months, he was finally finished. He wanted to immediately hop inside and travel to another world. However, he still had some stuff to do here before he could leave for his second voyage. Right after he finished, he received some good news. Rowena, Hermione, and Luna had advanced to Tier 5. So, he rushed to meet them. He was quite interested in their new abilities. Chapter 203, Planes? After arriving home, Edward saw the 3 of them waiting for him. With his senses, he could already feel the condensed mana inside their bodies. It was especially obvious since they just advanced and could not properly control it. Excellent, said Edward after seeing the 3 of them. He was not surprised that these 3 were the first to advance. Of all his wives, they had the highest talent. Nothing needs to be said about Rowena. As one of the greatest witches of her time, her talent is undeniable. Edward guessed that if it was not for her experiment with void energy in her soul, she would have advanced long ago. Hermione was able to shine in the old era even though she was a Muggle-born. At that time, in the wizarding world, few Muggle-born could become outstanding. Whether it was because of lack of resources, systemic discrimination, or talent, only a few could become accomplished in the wizarding world. And she was one of these few. As for Luna, her seer bloodline is not something that Edward could even currently understand. So, what ability did you guys get after fusing with the perfect philosopher's stone? Suddenly, Luna's eyes lit up and she said, just like you used to say, I think I'm very OP now. Oh? How so? The main thing is that my bloodline seemed to have been strengthened. I can now easily monitor the entire galaxy as long as I have enough energy to support me. You mean your divination can cover such a wide range? That's right. In that case, you are indeed OP, replied Edward. However, you have to be careful. We do not know what terrifying thing is there in the galaxy. If you peep at them, you could catch their attention. Edward was a little envious of her ability. Although his cosmic awareness has a wider range than her, however, there is still a major downside. It only works when danger is approaching or something major related to him. If something has nothing to do with him, his cosmic awareness will not work. What else? Asked Edward. Well, I seem to be able to see a few seconds into the future and predict danger. Edward looked up and down at her. Are you the protagonist, or am I? Of course, it's me, replied Luna, as if this was an obvious thing. Alright, you're the protagonist, replied Edward as he hugged her. What about you guys? I can freely travel to other dimensions, replied Rowena. I guess this might have something to do with my research on void energy. Edward became excited after hearing this and asked, does that include parallel universes? Rowena pondered for a moment after hearing this, then she disappeared for a few seconds before reappearing again. Fe. Apparently, yes. She had just returned to her timeline for a moment. Edward nodded happily, although still a little jealous. Although he can do the same thing as her, but only with his world gate. Meanwhile, Rowena noticed his gaze and shook her head. Don't act like a child who sees someone has a toy that he wanted, she said. Just like you tried to create a spell so that we can use cosmic awareness, I will try to do the same with my talent. Edward was not embarrassed that he was caught. He wanted to say at least I did not raise you guys for so long for no reason. However, he did not dare. His EQ was higher than this. Hermione, what about you? It's better to go to a different place to show you, she replied. So, the group headed to a pocket dimension according to her request. Once there, Hermione activated her talent. A humongous magic circle appeared on the ground. Then, a large army appeared on top of the circle. People wearing armors and spears lined up on one side. All their equipment was magical. On the other side were people on horses. It was a cavalry. There were at least 1 million of them, and based on the mana the others sensed, the majority were between Tier 3 and 4. Hundreds of them who acted like commanders were in Tier 5. What is this, exactly? Asked Edward. I can summon armies from other dimensions. Excellent. Are there any problems controlling them? Can you only summon humans? Are there any restrictions on the number? He asked. No, they are totally under my command. As for variety, I can summon any race, even demons, elemental creatures, golem, and many more. As for restrictions, it seems to be based on the amount of mana I have. Edward nodded his head, then suddenly remembered something. Can you summon people with higher tiers than you? Oh, I do not know. Let's try. Immediately another magic circle appeared. And along with it, the space began to tremble. Edward quickly ordered Morgana to seal the area and prepared to blow this dimension to pieces in case something out of control occurred. A few seconds later, a more than 10 meters tall demon with 2 horns appeared. The scent of sulfur suddenly overwhelmed the surroundings as magma could be seen at his feet. His body was full of fiery red scales, his wings were at least 30 meters, and his tail was more than 5 meters. The demon looked in the surroundings and said, $%% $% and our % at caret asterisk percent and asterisk dot. A look of excitement came to his face before the magic circle on the ground entered his head, then he seemed to have lost his sense of consciousness and knelt on one knee in front of Hermione. I can only summon 1 tier higher than me, and based on the strength of my soul, I can only control 2 of them currently. She's more OP than me, suddenly said Luna. However, Edward seemed distracted. Hermione, can you understand what he said? She shook her head. How about his memories, could you read it? Unfortunately, no. Morgana, check all the new language we gathered to see if you can translate what he just said. The little purple hair elf appeared next to him and said, all right. Checking the database. Matching demonic language. Translating. Where am I? This is not the abyss plane. Wait, this smell, this sense of freedom, it's the material plane. Abyss plane, material plane, muttered Edward with a confused look. He was still in a cosmic setting, how did planes suddenly come into existence? Suddenly, he remembered Merlin telling him that this world was more complex than he could imagine. Maybe, he meant this. Chapter 204, Myself. Edward tried to read the flame demon's memory but it was only filled with thoughts of obeying Hermione. The same thing for the other people summoned. He had a feeling that the information revealed was quite important. Unfortunately, he did not know how to get it. He could ask Albion, however, recently, their relationship has been rocky, so he doubted he would receive any answers. So, he could only ask Dumbledore to watch out for any information regarding Abyss Plane and Material Plane. Edward then placed his focus on this demon. He had never seen such a life form except in television and movies in his previous life. Can I dissect him? He asked. No, replied Hermione. Why not? Because movability is similar to a contract. I cannot proactively hurt my summon, especially the ones that are higher in tiers than me. What will happen if you do? They will immediately return to their place of origin. Edward nodded his head and did not force it. He began to observe this demon and scan his body with Morgana's help. The demon's anatomy had many organs that he could not understand just by observation. However, they were completely different from humans or any magical species he has ever seen. Could I at least get some blood from him? Hermione pondered for a moment before ordering him to give some of his blood. The demon did not hesitate to hand it over. Immediately, the 4 of them began to observe the demon's life code. The code was in ancient runes language, so they quickly deciphered a few things. They discovered that this demon had an unnatural survival ability. He could survive in any environment, no matter how harsh or extreme. His body would change based on his surroundings to survive. Whether it's extreme cold, heat, nuclear waste, the vacuum of space, thousands of meters deep underground, or under the sea, they can survive anywhere. Fascinating, muttered Edward. We need to find a way to capture of them to study. I can try to come up with a spell to summon these creatures without my talent. That way, we will not be restricted by any contracts, replied Hermione. However, it will take some time. Take your time, we are not in a hurry, said Edward. Then, for some reason, he became serious. Is there anything? Asked Rowena. Yes. I know that I promised to take all of you next time I travel to another world, but I have a mission for you and Luna. Everyone became serious based on the looks on Edward's face. They know that he meant business. I need you to travel through the multiverse to find a special timeline or timelines for me. Based on my theory, these timelines should be isolated and very difficult to enter. Is that all the information you have? Asked Rowena. That was not a lot of information to go with. Of course, not. Be patient and let me finish, he replied. He then sent a list with the name of a bunch of people. This is a list of the name of Hogwarts students during Hermione and Harry Potter's 7 years in school. The first way to identify these people is if they are not on the list. Of course, each timeline is different, so this is not enough. Edward paused for a moment to reorganize his words as he felt he did not explain things properly. These people belong to a group that can go by many names, with the main ones are Main God Space, Lord God Space, and Reincarnation Hall. All of them have some knowledge of the future and will use this knowledge to their advantage. Additionally, there is a high chance that these people will use foreign power systems completely different from our universe. Or, they might use a foreign magic system. They might even have technology that is too advanced by even the standard of the Empire now. They will usually try either to be really close friends with Hermione, Ron, and Harry or side with Voldemort. Their main purpose is to tamper with the timeline as much as possible. All of them began to ponder. As intelligent as these 3 were, they understood that this was not a simple mission. And it may be related to one of Edward's greatest secrets. What is their purpose for doing so? Asked Hermione. The best guess I can come up with is the fact that the people behind them can actually absorb some sort of power from the timeline and destroy the correction of fate. Besides that, I do not know much. In that case, what do we do after founding those timelines and those people? You have to be very careful not to directly interact with them. You can send clones, golems, or drones to secretly monitor the weak ones. Do not under any circumstances try to read their mind or memories. From what Edward remembered, the Lord God Space has a special band placed on its people's souls that will annihilate them once someone discovered them and searched their souls/memories. What I want you to find is a special group amongst these people will release a watch on something similar after being killed. The watch can be used to join the organization. What I want is that watch. However, I do know that not all of them have that watch. Most likely, the group that used the watch is very rare. I need you, Luna, to use your power to find the most likely timelines that the watch will watch. Luna pondered deeply about this. I should be able to do it. However, searching the entire multiverse will take a lot of time and effort. I narrow our search to timelines that are only between 1991 to 1998, making it easier to succeed. Additionally, you said that these timelines were most likely blocked from outside interventions. This is another clue that can help. Whatever you need to help, you can take it. However, you too have to be careful. You can take my gate for safety measures. In case something goes wrong, you can run away or contact me for backup. I will immediately rush over with the floating city. Everyone nodded. Then, Rowena asked, why are you interested in these people so much? If the group behind them is so powerful, wouldn't it be better to stay away from them? Edward was silent after hearing this and said, as you guys already guessed, my presence is an anomaly in this timeline. I feared that because of what I've done, these people will place their eyes on this timeline. Plus, I'm preparing for a much worse enemy. What can be worse than that? Myself, replied Edward. Chapter 205, Variants. Ever since he discovered the multiverse, Edward has been worried about one thing, the other versions of himself. He's not talking about the Edward Bones of the original Harry Potter universe that died very young, but the version of himself that also reincarnated. At first, Edward thought that he might be special and do not have a counterpart in the multiverse. However, his talk with Merlin confirmed that this was not the case. Once he learned this information, he immediately had a feeling that he would meet other versions of himself in the future. And he knew how scary of a person he could be. As a person, Edward knew how shady or evil he can be. Many of the things he has done can classify him as a dark wizard. And his current self is still very tame and restrained. However, he could imagine that there are versions of himself that are not. Versions of himself that do absolutely anything for power and knowledge. Versions of himself that do not have a family to restrain them. Versions of himself that truly felt into the dark side. Versions of himself that have no problem doing taboo experiments to strengthen themselves. Versions of himself that wants to conquer or destroy the multiverse. Sooner and later, he will meet these people. And he is sure of one thing, they will all want to compete for who is the original. Edward of course believed he was the original, and he has 2 points to back that claim. The first is the old man Merlin. He did not doubt for a moment that the old man did not have the ability to travel to the multiverse and choose any versions of himself to interact with. But he chose him. The second reason is the void tear that he discovered in Rowena's timeline. Old man Merlin's implied to him that his luck was the reason he discovered it, that he was destined to find that tear, which is the only existing one in the entire multiverse. Although Edward does not have a deep understanding of destiny, luck, and causality, however, from the many novels he read in his previous life, he knew that such concepts were real factors that can affect a person's life. He was sure that many if not all those versions of himself will want to travel to other universes. However, without that void tear, it will take them thousands if not more years to accomplish this on their own. Even if some of them also establish an empire or force to help them, it will still take a great deal of time. So, he still had an advantage. Nevertheless, Edward still wanted to prepare for when it is finally time to meet these guys. He has a plan that requires him to go to a specific world to acquire something. Right now, he hopes that the Akashic record will allow him to freely choose which universes to travel to, but he will not place all his hopes on it. Maybe he can also use the power of the main god Space. Rowena, Hermione, and Luna understood Edward's meaning. As the people closest to him, they understood how scary of a person he can be. Not only because of his unparalleled talent for magic but also because of the ideas in his mind. Ideas that he always has a way to make come true. Becoming an enemy of such a person is truly a terrifying thing. Not to mention a version of him that has no bottom line, no restraint, and no empathy. We will get ready and depart soon, said Rowena in a serious face. It would be fun to meet an evil version of myself, said Luna with a smile. I bet we could be friends. There is no need to hurry. You guys can take your time to prepare before leaving, replied Edward. Additionally, you can take this opportunity to solicit many of the great wizards and witches throughout history like the other founders and others that appeared in the Chocolate Frog card. As long as they are willing to leave their timelines and abide by the Empire's rules, they will be more than welcome, not just wizards, but also Muggle scientists, mathematicians, philosophers like Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, Isaac Newton, and many others from all over the globe. They would be of great use to the Empire. That's an excellent idea, commented Hermione. I will make a list. I just remember, I need you to help me do one last thing, suddenly said Edward. You seems to have a lot of demands, replied Rowena as she squinted her eyes at him. How about I repay you with my body? What a cringe thing to say, she replied. However, I accept your offer. Edward smiled before muttering, it's about time that Herpo's problem was permanently solved. After that, he went with Rowena to work on a small project. Meanwhile, Luna began to prepare for her multiverse voyage. Hermione had her own things to study, while Fleur and Bellatrix were still in the process of advancing to Tier 5. 3 months later, while the Empire was secretly preparing for war, something happened that disturbed Edward. He suddenly appeared outside of Earth's atmosphere with a shield surrounding him, looking in the distance. He could feel a strange power a few dozen light years away, and a look of confusion appeared on his face as this power felt very familiar. And he was not the only one who noticed that power. In the afterlife, Herpo immediately sensed that power when it appeared and observed it from a distance. Death Authority? How is that possible? He muttered as he quickly checked once more. However, he could feel that this was indeed a Death Authority that was completely different than his. Immediately, he became excited. If I could absorb it, not only will my power increase, my chances of breaking from this hellhole will drastically increase. As he prepared to rush to the destination of the Authority, he paused. How could such a thing that is beneficial to me suddenly appear here? Could it be a trap? He looked at Edward and noticed the confusion on his face, still remaining suspicious. However, when he saw the gate appearing behind him, Herpo knew that if he did not act immediately, he might forever lose that chance. So, he rapidly took out the remaining faith he had and sacrificed it to gain a moment of freedom. Without hesitation, he teleported to the asteroids where the Death Authority was sensed. No matter what, he could not resist the temptation nor this opportunity. Chapter 206, Herpo's Fate. As soon as Herpo landed on the asteroid, a black sphere came from his body and spread in every direction. And everywhere the sphere appeared, everything died. The rocks became dull and listless, the minerals in the asteroid turned into ash, and even the small microorganisms in the area died. Herpo did not know whether there was anything on the asteroid that could harm him, or just wanted to. So, he killed everything with his death field to prevent trouble. Additionally, the field should be able to buy him enough time to check whether there was any problem. Finally, he saw the origin of the Death Authority. It was a black orb deep underground. With a glance, he knew that this authority, although related to death, was completely different from his. It was probably more powerful. Instantly, Herpo became excited. Nevertheless, he still decided to be careful and checked thoroughly. Unfortunately for him, he soon felt someone breaking through his field and rushing here unimpeded. Immediately, he knew that he did not have much time. So, Herpo gritted his teeth and reached out to take the orb. As soon as his hand touched that orb, he felt dizzy for a split second before finding himself in a darkly lit room with nothing in sight. Herp looked around before sighing out loud. He raised his hand and a small dark-colored sun appeared on his hand. Without hesitation, he threw it. The dark sun rapidly grew to the size of the actual sun before exploding. Unfortunately, besides a slight tremor, nothing else happened. With his knowledge, Herpo could tell that he was in a pocket dimension, and it appeared to be a very structural steady one. With that attack, he should have been able to destroy this place and exit safely. Herpo frowned. As a god, he did not have to see the world as ordinary people. So, he spread his senses or consciousness in all directions. Then, he was able to see everything in 1,000 miles diameter. There was nothing in his surroundings, but he soon found what looked like a wall. Immediately, Herpo took one step before his more than 5 meters tall body immediately appeared in front of the wall. This should be the end of this pocket dimension, he muttered. Although I can teleport inside the dimension, I cannot leave. Maybe if I break the wall, I can exit. Immediately after thinking this, another dark sun appeared in his hand and attacked the wall. But it was of no use. Herpo did not stop trying though. He used countless different spells or attacks on the wall. In the end, he was angered and punched the wall instead. Damn it, he groaned in pain as he looked at the burning flash of his hand. The moment he punched that wall, he saw a gray shield appear and blocked him. The shield even injured his divine body. Finally, Herpo sighed deeply once again before slowly muttering, "In my youth, I was full of boldness and excitement for the future. However, the older I got, the more careful I became. It can be said that I reached the point of timid. Yet, I cannot believe that I fail because of carelessness. Come out, wizard. I know you're here. I once read something along the line of the best bait is when the prey knows that it is being baited but still cannot resist the temptation," said an illusory shadow that suddenly appeared in front of Herpo. "There is no shame in being defeated to such wise and profound words," said Edward as he looked at the death god in front of him. No, as he looked at the former wizard, Herpo the Foul. The two stared at each other for at least 5 minutes. In the end, Herpo finally spoke. "So, you've trapped me here. What is your purpose? I have to say, you are the most gifted wizard I have ever encountered. If you do not count anomalies like Merlin and Morgan Le Fay, your abilities and achievements have surpassed all wizards, both ancients and modern," praised Edward. "It's a shame that you seem to be an individual with terrible luck. Do not walk around in circles," grunted Herpo. "State your purpose. What do you think my purpose is?" Nothing more than wanting knowledge from me, and becoming loyal to you and serving you. So, what do you think? In your deepest dreams, replied Herpo. His black robe flutter with the wind, displaying his agitated emotions. Even I die, you will not get a single thing from me, I would rather die than let you profit from. See. Hee, smirked Edward. Then, go ahead, kill yourself. Everything became quiet as he looked at Herpo with a calm smile on his face. After waiting for a few seconds, he reiterated, why don't you do it? Herpo hated the smirk on the latter's face, so he tried his best to control his emotions. Things did not go as he planned. I can tell you, continued Edward. Even your death will benefit. If you die, I can still use your body to study. After all, you're still a god, I'm sure that you're quite valuable. And even if you detonate your entire body leaving nothing intact, I can still study the process of a god dying, so I will still benefit in the end. Herpo clenched his hands tightly after hearing this. If he did not know that only a projection was in front of him, he would have torn it apart with his bare hands. You still have some time to make a decision, said Edward. Cooperate with me and things will be easier for you. In the end, I might even release you in the future. Do you think I will believe your words? You underestimate my confidence and arrogance, replied Edward calmly. When I become a Tier 8 Arcanist, you will not be much of a threat to me or the Empire, I will not have to resort to schemes and plots to defeat you. By then, I will have no problem releasing you as you will be nothing more than one of the countless many Tier 8 people under me. He gave him a glance before continuing, you should be aware of the Empire's law that allows people to challenge me for the throne. By then, if you can defeat me, you can inherit everything that I have built. After saying that, Edward disappeared. Chapter 207 Divine Power. Academy City, Arcane Tower number 17. Edward and Rowena stood in front of a tall screen that displayed Herpo's every move inside the pocket dimension. Do you think he will agree? Asked Rowena. Unlikely. Why do you think so? If it was the old Herpo, he would definitely agree to save his life at least on the surface, replied Edward. However, I can see that his divinity has changed him over the years. He has taken too much pride in his status as a god. So, how could a god bow down to a mortal? Rowena nodded her head without saying anything more. She did not have any sympathy for the fate of Herpo. In her timeline, she was kidnapped by him and almost sacrificed. Additionally, there is a very high chance that Rowena of this timeline died because of him. Edward turned around to the reddish woman wearing a lab coat standing behind him. Tower Master Artie, we will begin the preliminary experiment a few days later. I will participate in the early stages but the rest will be handed to you and your team. It is my utmost honor, Your Majesty, replied Artie. She could not believe that she had the opportunity to experiment with an actual god. As a Native American, she has always been very spiritual. And even the magic her people used in the old era was mostly based on shamanism. They could summon the spirit of their ancestors not only to fight for them but to give them blessings, to cure diseases, and even to curse their enemies. Because of this, the ancestors of many tribes are worshipped as gods. Now, she would experiment on a real god. The ancestral magic of our people have become even more powerful after being translated to the arcane rune system. Maybe I can make even more improvement after studying this death god, thought Artie, unable to contain her excitement. A few days passed before Edward once again talked to Herpo. He asked the latter if he had thought things through, but he was simply ignored. Shrugging his shoulder, Edward left to begin his experiment. Your Majesty, how do you want to begin? Asked the Tower Master. From what we know, gods are immune to most magic except for high magic. So, let's begin by testing his magic immunity. Use wandcraft spells and draconic language spells on him to see the effect. Artie nodded her head before beginning. The entire pocket dimension was under her command, so, with a touch of a few buttons on the glass-looking computer on her hand, she selected a spell to attack. She began with the weakest spells like Expelliarmus, to Bombarda, to eventual dark magic like Fiendfire and the 3 killing curses. And as expected, none of them were effective. Once they touched him, it was like a stone that immediately sunk deep into a river without causing any ripples. Besides annoying Herpo, nothing happened. FENL. Truth be told, the death god wanted to block these attacks as he could guess the motive behind these weak spells. The fact that he was treated as an experimental material almost drove him insane. Regrettably, he did not want to waste the energy inside his body as he did not give up the hope of escaping. Interesting, muttered Edward, then, he connected to Morgana inside his mind and said, connect to the floating city's main energy reserve and transfer it to this tower. As you command, Master. A few seconds afterward, the massive Philosopher's Stone at the core of the floating city began to transfer a lot of its mana. Warning, 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 suddenly said the tower spirit. Detecting large surge in energy being transferred. Please take immediate action. Tower Master Artie was immediately surprised as she checked. When she found the quantity of energy being transferred to her tower, she was genuinely surprised. According to the data, if this energy were to go out of control, the entire solar system will be instantly eradicated. No need to be alarmed, said Edward. Use that large quantity of mana to power up the spells and see the effects. It is common knowledge that the more mana used in a spell, the more powerful the effect. Even if it is a rudimentary spell such as the disarming charm should be able to disarm millions of people with enough energy powering it up. Artie quickly regained her bearing. Only the Emperor is authorized to easily mobilize such a large amount of energy on the planet. She should have figured this out sooner. Without hesitation, she once again began to attack Herpo with wandcraft spells and draconic language magic. Unfortunately, no matter how much mana she used, it seemed to be useless. These gods do have some reason to be so prideful, commented Rowena, who was watching this experiment. As she looked at Herpo, she squinted for a moment before saying, "We have to find a way to reproduce such magic immunity." "Yes, but we have to find the cause first," replied Edward. "This time, use arcane magic." Tower Master Artie immediately followed orders. This time, she finally got a reaction out of Herpo. A translucent shield appeared to protect him once an arcane rune spell was used. It seems to instinctively protect him from harm. Edward frowned after seeing this. If things go like this, he will not be able to distinguish the effect of high magic on divine beings. Use the mana forbidden enchantments. The enchantment was activated followed by a few more attacks. However, the shield still manifested itself. Logically speaking, the enchantment should have blocked Herpo's mana and rendered him useless. But it did not work. Edward seemed to have thought of something and said, "Use the energy-absorbing enchantment." A powerful suction suddenly appeared underneath Herpo's feet trying to suck the energy out of his body. Immediately, he resisted with all his strength. As a god, he had absolute control over his energy. The struggle lasted for 3 hours before a small amount was drawn from him. Immediately, a preliminary analysis was made by the tower spirit. "This is not mana," said Artie. "This should be divine power," muttered Edward. One of his experiments involved the power of faith. With the gradual rise of the arcane god religion, he discovered the power of faith. Based on a preliminary study, this power was very harmful to the mind and soul. However, Edward once theorized that a new form of energy could be created by mixing faith with mana. He labeled this energy as divine power. Unfortunately, he did not find the right way to mix these two together. Plus, this experiment was postponed to a later date. However, now, he might have a chance to peep at the secret of divine power. Immediately, he became excited. Chapter 208 More Advanced Magical Creatures. After having a direction, Edward immediately began to act. He sent his research on the power of faith and his theory on divine power to Artie. After reading and analyzing it, she began to analyze the divine power again. This time, she focused on detecting mana and faith inside of the divine power. Mana, as the main energy source of the Empire, is well researched. However, very little is currently known about faith. Based on Edward's short experiments, he concluded that faith is a very pure form of emotion just like the ones used to create the lesser stones. Once absorbed, it can drastically increase the power of the mind and soul. However, it can also influence the soul and slowly change the personality and views of the people who absorbed it. With this information, the three of them began to once again analyze the divine power drawn from Herpo. And it was proven that Edward's theory was partially correct. Divine power did contain faith and mana but also many different other things. Currently, they could only recognize two things, soul or spiritual energy, and a small part of authority. As Edward watched the result of the past few days, he said, "Alright, it is obvious that discovering the mystery of this power will take a lot of time and energy. So, let's continue with other basic experiments." Artie ordered one of her many lab assistants to go get a clone as a sample. Then, a small part of the divine power was injected into the clone's body. However, less than 5 seconds afterward, the clone's body exploded, sending all his organs and bodily fluids scattered all over the white room. "This thing is so volatile," she muttered. After ordering the tower spirit to use the cleaning enchantments and returning the room to its white and pristine state, she reviewed the data gathered in that explosion. This time, use a clone that has been genetically enhanced for the 3rd time. Previously, the Empire could only successfully accomplish 2 enhancements, but recently, with the knowledge Edward brought back, technology has rapidly developed and the 3rd enhancement has been developed. Under Artie's order, the next phase of the experiment began. A new clone was brought up and the divine power was introduced into his body. Immediately afterward, he dropped on the floor, crying in pain. 5 minutes later, the clone also exploded like the first one. However, Artie frowned as she was not satisfied with the data she got. So, she sent a few more, and they all ended in the same way. "Send in a clone with aura inside his body." "Tower Master, we only have Tier 1 and Tier 2 clone aura masters," said one of the assistants. "Not even one Tier 3, she asked. She did not ask for higher ones. Currently, there were few Tier 4 arcanists in the Empire, let alone clones. So, she did ask about them. None. Artie was a little embarrassed, she did not expect to be so poor as a Tower Master. She could not help it, her previous experiment was very expensive and even went over the limit of the Imperial grant. She had to use her own pocket money to make up for it. You don't have to worry about resources, said Edward before contacting Morgana to send a few Tier 4 and Tier 5 clone aura masters. Currently, he is probably the only person with this kind of resource. During his time in the Fullmetal Alchemist world, he trained many Tier 5 clones both for battles and in case he needed it for experiments. After thanking him, Artie returned to her experiment. She injected the divine power inside the clones. This time, it did not explode. Instead, the divine power absorbed the aura inside their bodies, then proceeded to absorb their life force. All the clones turned into old people before dying, including the Tier 5 ones. The divine power has consciousness, said Artie. Or maybe just instinct, commented Edward. Let's test with mana. A few clones with mana inside their bodies were then used. This time, the response of the divine power was more aggressive. It began to expel the mana out of the clones' bodies as if it was claiming its territory. And the process was not gentle at all. So mana and divine power cannot coexist together, muttered Edward. He then remembered that he read a novel in his past life called The Archmage Returns After 400 Years. In this novel, the protagonist's family conducted experiments to allow a body to contain both mana and divine power. If possible, he would like to go to that world and get the information about that experiment. However, it is yet to be known whether the divine power in his universe is the same as that one. The experiment continued. This time, a clone with liquid mana was used. The divine power fought for about 5 minutes before it was expelled out the body. Finally, when it was the turn of the crystallized mana, the battle lasted for more than an hour. In the end, the body of the clone could not support any longer and fell apart. The next part of the experiment was still the relationship between divine power and mana, however, this time, instruments were used for the mixture instead of clones. The result was still the same. After that, they tested different types of poison and potions on Herpo. During the entire process, the energy-draining enchantments did not stop working. So, what is your ultimate plan for him? Asked Rowena. After a brief pause, he replied, First, I will dissect him. That's it? In a live broadcast to all the people of the Empire. Rowena's eyes lit up after hearing this as she understood the implication of doing so. Edward has always wanted to change the spirit of the people of the Empire. And what better ways than to dissect a god in front of all the people? FEC. This act will not only increase his prestige and control over the Empire but also instilled the idea of pursuing the truth and knowledge into the young and impersonating minds of children, but also many arcanists. They will witness their ruler treating a god as an experimental material, all in the names of knowledge and truth. Another benefit is when the Empire confronts other gods in the future. If any of these gods try to spread faith in the Empire, that would be extremely difficult since the people would have long lost any awe to any gods. In their eyes, the so-called god is nothing but a more powerful or advanced magical creature. Chapter 209 Breaking News. The second step is to gather as much information possible from his mind, added Edward. However, I can foresee this will be more troublesome. Based on his recent observation of Herpo, he could tell that the latter was the kind of person who would rather destroy all his memories than let Edward have them. So, even if he could find a way to read the memories of a god, it might be futile. The best way would be to convince the latter to surrender and hand over the knowledge. Rowena also figured out this issue. Your effort may be proven futile. True. In that case, I will erase his consciousness and turn him into a puppet. Anyway, a Tier 8 divine puppet would be a great benefit for the current empire, replied Edward ruthlessly. Then, Edward continued his basic research. He diluted the divine energy gathered and mixed it with a few magical herbs to neutralize its instinct. And, divine power will be replaced to divine energy. Then, the potion was tested on animals and clones, both magical and non-magical. Soon, the result came out. This divine potion had many benefits: healing diseases, prolonging life, healing the soul, increasing mana, increasing physical stats, and even optimizing bloodline. Of course, it can also serve as a poison too. The divine energy of Herpo seemed to contain certain characteristics of his divinity or authority, the power of death. So, based on this characteristic is used, the potion created can have both positive and negative effects. These gods are truly the darling of this world, commented Tower Master Artie as she reviewed the data of the potion. However, she quickly frowned. Based on the data, she discovered some commonality between this god and her ancestor summon magic. Mainly in the aspect of faith or belief. As such, she felt that she missed something during the examination of these people who drank the potion. After pondering for a few minutes, she suddenly muttered. The ancestor imprint. Shouldn't a god have something similar? The ancestor summoning magic of the Native American people is very complex magic that involved bloodline, soul, and belief. Without any of these three things, it is impossible for outsiders to practice, including Edward. He did a few experiments and took out a sample of the bloodline of a Native American to try to summon something, but it failed. After many experiments, he realized that this was a form of magic tied only to a person's ethnicity. And in the Empire, there are a few magic like this. Because of the nature of these magics, he cannot use them no matter what. However, he was not discouraged. Instead, he wanted to study this system to see if he could recreate the heroic spirits from the Fate universe. It's a shame that he had not succeeded as of now. Artie began to search the bloodline and soul of the people who drank the potion. And after a deep investigation of their soul dimension, she discovered a weird mark or imprint which was oozing the power of death. I was right, she muttered. One of the reasons that Native American magic is unique is because all of them have a unique spiritual imprint in their soul that connected them to their ancestor. The imprint will not affect them and can be passed down to their descendants through the bloodline. Once Edward learned of this, he immediately thought of a comic book character from his previous life, Black Panther. He could summon the spirit of his ancestor to talk to them and ask for their wisdom. He could gain all the knowledge and experience of his ancestors. So, he suggested that the Native American people developed in that direction, and they succeeded. Because of this, much of the lost knowledge of the past was discovered by them, and even a few secrets of the past. This knowledge brought great development to their ethnicity as a whole and the empire. It's a shame that this magic is not perfected yet and many things or secrets have not been discovered yet. What do you think of this imprint? Asked Edward, who was feeling a great deal of satisfaction for choosing the right person to lead this project. With one glance, I can tell that this imprint is different from ours. However, I do not yet have any more data to speculate more. You should have a theory or some guesses, right? Yes, she replied. I guess that Herpo could use this mark to slowly turn those people into his believers. Their souls would most likely belong to him after their deaths. And more importantly, he might be able to use it to escape. Edward pondered for a moment. In that case, place these people in another pocket dimension during the testing. Be on alert at all times and make sure to dispose of them completely once the experiment is over. I will supervise every step with caution. After nodding, Edward continued, found a way to remove the imprint. This divine potion can be of great use to accelerate the growth of the empire. The so-called divine potion was only a basic potion relying only on the divine energy to have so many effects. If the downside is removed, once the potion masters get their hands on it, they can create many wonders. FEL, Additionally, the divine energy was diluted to create that potion. Once it is throughout studied, it can be directly used to make potions. This level of potion will even have an effect on Edward's level and accelerate the speed he reaches higher tiers. After potion experiment, Edward was prepared to leave the rest of the work with Artie. He gave a last glance at Herpo. Right now, the latter could still hold on, but it was only a matter of time. The energy-draining enchantment could only draw a minuscule amount of divine energy from him. However, the more Artie understood this new type of energy, the faster and more efficient the enchantment will become. So, it is only a matter of time before Herpo is drained and becomes helpless. Thank you, Tower Master Artie, for all your work. It was my pleasure. Scene break. Every citizen of the Empire suddenly received an emergency alert. So, they quickly turned on their television, used their smartwatch to log on into Skynet. Then, they saw a beautiful Japanese woman appearing in front of their screens. With a calm and solemn tone, she said, "Breaking news. During a voyage in the Blackwood star system located 65.4 light-years away, a large fleet of our Imperial Navy was attacked and destroyed. According to report, there were no survivors as of now." Chapter 210 Nation Address. "We have footage that has recently been salvaged through divination," said the news anchor. Immediately, footage of the attack was shown. The people could see countless Imperial ships being bombarded into smithereens. Compared to the more suave design of the Empire's ships, the enemy's fleet looked more barbaric with many metal points coming from them. As the enemy's bombardment began, the citizen could see bodies flying of their fallen comrades fallen into deep space, never to be seen. A few of the ships managed to erect shields to protect them. However, for some reason, these shields stopped working and the ships were destroyed. The entire video was visually spectacular. Many of these spaceships were more than a dozen kilometers in size, and yet, they were still annihilated. As the citizen watched the video, they could feel the pain and despair of soldiers, their hatred and longing for a miracle. A few seconds after the video, the news anchor once again showed. "From the information we have gathered so far, this was an attack by a race referred to as Fair. After discovering then, the Imperial Navy sent a diplomatic contact for communication and exchange. And the leaders of the Fair race acquiesced to this exchange. However, this was nothing but a ruse. They somehow successfully infiltrated our fleet's control system and disabled our shields and weapon systems. Then, in cold blood, they destroyed our fleet even though we contacted them with motives of peace and prosperity." The anchor paused for a moment to build tension, then she continued, "This is a sad day for our empire. So, let us all take a minute of silence for our fallen comrades." After that, she lowered her head without saying anything. Following this, the entire solar system became quiet. The noisy city became peaceful. The rushing cars stopped, the flying ones descended from the sky. The majority of people stopped for an entire minute, in silent remembering of the people who died serving the empire. A minute later, the anchor said, "My name is Akana Mikasa from Arcane News, and I will be following the latest development of this event." Immediately afterward, the entire empire was turbulent. All the media outlets began to talk about this story. As the official medial of the empire and the biggest one, Arcane News is usually the one with the best information regarding this topic. However, other news media also have their way of gathering information. So, the next few days, this was the only thing that could be seen. All type of social media was only talking about this, including many stars. Powerful arcanists or scholars will give their opinions on the current situation and analyze the response of the emperor and council. Many people began to wonder whether the fair race was so powerful to so easily annihilate an imperial fleet of such scale. Soon, the answer was revealed. EOL.C. The commander of the Imperial Navy had an interview and said that the Empire was caught off guard as they were not used to interstellar war, hence the reason for such an easy defeat. Many people blame him for delegation of duty while many people understood that this was a normal error. Over time, no official news was heard from the Emperor, but people began to advocate for war. The majority of ordinary people wanted the Empire to teach the fair race a deep and unforgettable lesson. Few opposed such drastic means, talking about making them pay compensation and sign a non-aggression treaty with the Empire. However, these people who advocate for peace were in the minority. The Chinese saying, "Not my race must have different thoughts," became popular during this time. Inside his palace, Edward was chatting with his aunt, Amelia. "I still think it was a waste to use such a large fleet," said Amelia. "A small one would not have as much impact, making the people feel the severity of the situation," replied Edward. "Be that as it may, this was a waste of resources in my opinion. Don't fret the small stuff. What about the crew of that fleet? Have they been placed appropriately?" "Yes. We chose most soldiers with no parents and relatives. So, it is fine. What about the evidence?" "Don't worry, everything has been taken care of. No one will know that the soldiers in the fleet were replaced by clones." Edward nodded his head. The Empire needed an excuse to declare war, and the death of its people is the best excuse to mobilize people's emotions, and also solicit their patriotic nature. However, he also did not want to kill his own people in vain, so, he switched the soldiers in the fleet with clones. After being reassured by his aunt, Edward continued to review the plan for the war. However, he soon frowned. "Is there a problem?" asked Amelia. "Yes. Although we can easily win this war because of our vast difference in technology, you should remember that this is more of training than a war of annihilation. We can take this opportunity to test many of our interstellar warfare theories." Amelia nodded and took note of this fact. Then, the two went over many things that needed to oversee before the war. At the end of the meeting, Amelia hesitated for a moment before asking, "Is the last act of the war really needed?" Edward paused after hearing this, sighed out loud. "I understand how you feel. Personally, I do not want so many lives under my hand. However, as the Empire grows and develops, this is something that we all need to become used to." Amelia also sighed before looking at her nephew deep in his eyes. "Be mindful not to become numb to this kind of thing. You can be logical and calculating but never become numb." "I understand." Scene break. All the citizens of the Empire waited with bated breath in front of a screen. Today, the Arcane Emperor will finally address the nation regarding the current situation of the world and the future. Soon, Edward appeared in front of everyone. He was wearing a white robe with golden designs that looked beautiful and mysterious, a black crown on his head. Magical light enveloped his body, making him nobler. He was holding a short scepter with his two hands laying on the top. He was not sitting on a throne but standing up. His deep blue eyes seemed to be looking at every single individual watching this address. "My fellow citizen, the past few days have been quite the stressful and fearful time. In our attempt to explore the universe, we have suffered a great calamity." Everyone could feel the solemnity of the situation, so they listened carefully. "I would like to tell you that this was an accident or an alienated incident. Unfortunately, this is not the truth. The universe is a dark and scary place, where laws and morality are often trampled on by the strong. Out there, technology and magic are developed at any price and without any restraints, without any morality or ethics. Thousands of races fight every day not only for survival but also for domination. Some of these races have existed since the dawn of time, and their existing conflict can be described as eternal. On top of all that, the gods stand above everything in the universe, dictating and weaving the destiny of us, mortals. In the past decades, our arcane empire has made great progress. We can say with the utmost confidence that in our short existence, we have surpassed many races and civilizations that have existed for countless millennia. However, it does change the fact that in the grand scheme of the universe, we are nothing but a sapling that has just been planted. Although our roots have been firmly laid down, during our growth, we will still have to withstand wind and rain to survive, to grow. It is unfortunate that our first breeze has arrived so soon, but do not fret, my fellow citizens, as we are ready to tackle any adversities that come our way." He then raised his hand and placed it on his shoulder. "May the arcane truth guide us in these troubled times." All the people in the solar system stood up, placed their right hand on their shoulder and their left hand on their back, and repeated, "May the arcane truth guide us in these troubled times." Chapter 211, Low Civilization. The people of the Arcane Empire knew that war was coming, however, no one was scared. Because their beloved emperor told them that they were ready to face the unknown future, ready to face the threat from the cosmos. Inside a meeting room, Edward sat at the head of a table while reviewing some information with a holographic projection in front of him. It seems that my aunt was correct. War is the perfect way to remove many of the prejudices and racism from the old time. With a common enemy, the people have banded together under their identity as both humans and citizens of the empire. Although the problem is not solved, it is much better. With time, we can still cultivate the patriotic nature of the younger generation. After closing the image in front of him, he looked at the other people in the room and said, "It should be about time, so, let's begin." Many people sat at a rectangular table. All these people included generals of the empire, including Lucius Malfoy since he was in charge of the Earth Defense Guard. The man who sat to Edward's right hand was Albert Montblanc, the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Navy. After hearing his words, he stood up and placed his hand on a crystal ball on the table. He injected his mana inside. Immediately afterward, an image was projected in the middle of the table. The image showed a room with about 30 people, sitting together and arguing. These people were relatively tall compared to humans, and they can even be called little giants. More importantly, they all had blue skins. The fair race. A meeting of their highest council took place. The 30 people attending were all the fair people that reached Tier 4. And in the middle of that meeting sat a man with a crown on his head. He was the fair king and the most powerful person in their race. Just by observation, it could be seen that some part of his skin had already turned red. According to the Empire's study, this is a sign that he is about to reach Tier 5. And because of this this person was able to sit on the throne. According to Fur's law, only the most powerful can be kind. Nevertheless, since he did not have an overwhelming advantage over his peers, at least not yet, a council is still needed to vote on important issues. The king has more votes than ordinary people and can determine the final verdict on certain controversial issues. "What do you guys think about this arcane empire?" asked the king. "Nothing but a bunch of stupid people. They so easily trusted us, which allowed us to infiltrate their fleet and destroy it. Plus, how can they tell us that they are declaring on us? Wouldn't it be better to just attack us?" replied another fair council member. A few people agreed with him. Meanwhile, in the Empire's war room, a few people frowned after hearing this. In fact, some people had the same idea. Unfortunately, according to the Galactic Federation regulation, it is required to send a declaration of war before attacking anyone. As long as a civilization or race reached a certain level, they have to abide by this regulation. A few members of the War Council argued that the Federation will not know if they do not follow the regulations. However, after asking Dumbledore to search the relative information, he knew that the Federation seemed to have a mysterious way to know when people break the rules. CM. It may be some spells or magic weapons. Nevertheless, Edward did not want to entangle with these people, at least for now. Or maybe, they are confident in themselves, added another fair member. "Ironet, do you have something to say?" asked the king. "I have watched the video of the conflict over and over again. Honestly, there are too many things that felt wrong." The fair king immediately began to pay attention. Their race is a very combatant one, as such, only the strong can become rulers. However, being strong does not equate to intelligence. The majority of the people in the council only know how to fight and kill. Only a few of them have great wisdom, and Ironet is one of them. The first thing is the fact that their fleet was too easily destroyed. Their command system was easily hacked by us after infiltrating, and the response of the soldiers was too mediocre. "This only shows that their technology is mediocre compared to us," replied another member. "That could be true. But remember what energy their fleet used to power themselves?" "Mana," replied one person. His words immediately made the other people frown. The fair race has been studying mana for thousands of years, trying to not only master it and use it in the development of their technology. Unfortunately, they never succeeded. However, now, under Ironet's reminder, they remembered that the Arcane Empire had mastered the power of mana. This was one of the reasons that they attacked. Also, remember, the wreckage of their fleet mysteriously disappeared afterward and we could not salvage anything. Our scientists could not even understand how it disappeared. The council member immediately began to take the situation seriously. Although they do not like to use their head, it did not mean that they were stupid. After all, the majority of them have lived a very long time. And with time, even a pig can become wise after experiencing a few hundred years of life. "Can you guess the reasons for all these anomalies?" asked the king. "I cannot," replied Ironet. "However, one thing I know for sure, this will not be as easy as our past ones. We should take things seriously and do whatever necessary to prepare." The other members nodded their heads and began to discuss plans and strategies for this war. Meanwhile, in the war room, one of the generals sneered after watching this and commented, "This is the fate of low-level civilization. Without mastering the power of destiny, they lose the ability to control it." "True," said another person. "With our advanced technology and the information gathering of divination, this war will be a piece of cake." "Do not be too complacent," suddenly said Commander Albert. In the future, we will have to fight races and civilizations that have mastered the power of anti-divination. At that time, war will not be so easy. Then, the issue we will have to deal with involves how to gather intel, how to ensure our war goes successfully. What if the enemy has better divination spells than us? How to fight a war with such a disadvantage? These are the type of questions that you guys should think about instead of being proud of such small success. The other generals quickly regained their bearings and nodded. They knew that the commander was correct. As the most elite soldiers and strategists of the empire, they quickly adjusted their ways of thinking. As for Edward, he was very satisfied with Commander Albert. The man was very capable and part of him was a little guilty of handing his position to Olivier. Unfortunately, the Imperial Navy will become too powerful in the future and must be controlled by someone he could truly trust. Nevertheless, he will still give the latter the position of second-in-command and give him some merit to compensate him. Chapter 212, Ground Strike. We have already decided on a tactic to use in this war, said Commander Montblanc, so, let's follow the previous plan until something changes. Immediately, he sent orders to deploy Team Metal Ice on this ground operation. Blackwood Star System, an invisible ship floated on top of one of the 7 planets. There were 5 people inside the ship, 2 women and 3 men. All of them looked at the screen of the ship that display an entirely green planet. Are you telling me we have to parachute into this planet from outer space? Asked one of the men. Rogue, this is not the first time, so why are you bitching? Shut up, Wolf. The reason I'm asking is wouldn't it be better to just beam straight to our destination, replied Rogue. This is both a mission and a training exercise, replied Bloodsucker, who was one of the 2 women in this team. With our technology, we can directly teleport to the enemy's planet. However, what if one day we meet an enemy that can block space? We need to have ways to secretly infiltrate their camp using other means, and this mission is to prepare for the future. Wolf, why are you so grumpy recently? Suddenly said Shadow. In the past few missions, you have been complaining non-stop. I'm just tired of the constant back-to-back mission. Before you joined this squad, you were told about the consequences, added Bloodsucker. I know this, but I just get mad for some reason thinking about how these people at headquarters send us to do all these difficult tasks while they get to sit comfortably at home. Isn't how the military always has been? You slaved on the battlefield so that one day, you get to sit comfortably and watch and dictate conflicts from afar, replied Shadow. Rogue sneered after hearing this. Of all the generals that currently make up the top of the military today, only a handful of them has ever seen true blood in a real war, and that is only during the Demeter invasion. All the others have to use their brain to get where they are. I despise these people. The people in the room became quiet for a moment, then Wolf said, well, the Empire has been in peace for many years. Besides a few small conflicts with the Atlantean and the Martians, there was no great war. Bloodsucker suddenly giggled. I have always told you, Rogue, that your mouth will get you into trouble one day. What do you mean? Didn't you read the mission debrief? The war room will be monitoring this mission through divination. Rogue's face immediately became unsightly. He was just caught cursing his boss in 4K. All the other people laughed at him with glee. It's time, suddenly said the one person who remained silent during the entire conversation. She had a very noticeable presence, and as soon as she said these words, all the other people suddenly straightened up their postures. Yes, Captain, replied the other 4 in unison. Olivier nodded her head before pressing a button on a watch that was on her wrist. Then, a blue slim exoskeleton suit that looked like the one Master Chief wore from Halo covered her body. She walked to the back of the ship where there was an opening. Without hesitation, she flew from there. All the other members also wore their suits before jumping at her. Rogue was the last to jump from the ship. He squinted his eyes before screaming, "Hail the Empire and the Emperor! And all of you generals that have dedicated your lives to serving our great nation." The people in the war room smacked their lips while acting as if nothing happened. They were all fully aware of what kind of person that Rogue was. As soon as Oliver jumped off the ship, her suit immediately entered stealth mode. While entering the planet's atmosphere, the suit did not heat up, nor was it detected by any technology. After entering the stratosphere, she could see many drones and ships patrolling the sky. The entire planet seems on high alert. Based on her training, she began to lead her team to the previously planned landing spot. After landing, the team quickly surveyed their surroundings to ensure that they were not ambushed. "Captain, where are we?" "About half a kilometer from our intended target. That's our best record yet." "Still not good enough," commented Olivier. The other members were not surprised by this statement. Their team has the best records and no other Space Marine team has ever beaten their records. Yet, each time, their captain will tell them that it was not good enough and train them to beat their previous record. "How is the reading?" asked Olivier. "Temperature is normal enough for ordinary people to live. Gravity is at least 5 times of Earth, oxygen about 30 to 50% higher, and a small trace of mana is detected in the environment," replied Bloodsucker. "Could we survive if our suit malfunctioned, LC?" Their squad was not made of those genetically modified soldiers that can survive in any harsh environment, so Olivier wanted to be more careful. "With a shield, we should be able to. There is a harsh wind capable of slicing any normal person as long as they stand there. Oliver quickly processed the information she received. The fair race has powerful skin which allowed them to survive in this harsh environment. It can even be argued that they evolved to survive in this environment. The high concentration of oxygen could be the reason that their races are much taller than humans on average. After analyzing everything, she immediately led her team to their destination. The tallest fair race is 5 meters while the shortest is 2 meters. Because of this, the houses they lived in are much bigger than humans. And when it comes to their architecture, it has a metal feel or theme to everything. Additionally, the houses have specific colors that dictate the status of the individuals. Ordinary people's house is gray, while other houses are based on the highest level of strength of the individual who habitat. The fair race's skin changes color based on their tiers, and their houses will also use the same color of the person's tier. When it comes to government houses and buildings, gold is usually used as a color scheme. With the stealth technology, Olivier's team successfully arrived at their location, the spacecraft launching pad. The technology of the fair race is still in its infancy and launching pad is still required for all fleet to begin their interstellar travel. The mission of the Metal Ice team is to infiltrate this place and blow it up to dust. Without much effort, Olivier's team successfully infiltrated the building. Shadow had already hacked the system and could monitor every place and every individual. When the team prepared to place a bomb to destroy the facility, something unexpected occurred. Chapter 213 War is unpredictable. Something is wrong, suddenly said the Shadow. We have been discovered. How is that possible? Asked Wolf. With these people's low technology, no divination, and no tier 5 individuals, how did they discover us? I do not know, but the room we are in is currently surrounded and many people are rapidly approaching. All the members immediately realized that the level of the mission has changed. Bloodsucker, Wolf, and Rogue quickly locked the doors in the room that they were in. Then, they looked at their captain to await further orders. No thought of aborting the mission came to their mind. As elite, they are trained to respond to the situation. After pondering for a moment, Olivier said, Shadow, quickly control the communication of this site and prevent any information from coming in and out. Already on it, Captain. In Shadow's microcomputer, there was a magical artificial intelligence or spirit AI designed with technology and a powerful soul at the core. One of the advantages of the spirit AI is that it can use spells to help in the process of hacking technology, making it not only powerful but also very difficult to detect. After all, it was using metaphysical means to deal with physical things. As such, Shadow can easily hack any place or system on this planet, even if it is a place that is completely cut off from the web and has its own power source. Olivier then raised her head and said out loud, if the War Council is monitoring this operation, please send us any kind of message. Back in the Empire, the war room was in chaos. The divination crystal no longer displayed the operation, so these generals were contacting all the available diviners to see what was the problem. All the people in the room were well aware of the identity of Olivier, and they could not imagine what would happen if something were to happen to her. While these people had worry written all over their faces, Edward was the only calm one, thinking about the reason that the divination failed. The fair race did not have any anti-divination technology, so he wondered what went wrong. As for Olivier's safety, he was not that worried. He is the one who designed that suit of hers and he knew all the secret things he placed inside. Olivier is a strong independent woman and she wanted to suffer through danger with her soldiers. However, Edward would not allow such a thing, so he secretly modified the suit so that in the worst-case scenario to prioritize her safety above everything else, whether mission or her team member. Calm down, everyone, said Edward in an authoritative voice. The recent event has shown us that in war, anything can happen and we should be ready to deal with any situation. The other people calmed down. As long as the Emperor did not blame them for the disappearance of the future royal concubine, everything else is fine. Now, let's trust the abilities of the Metal Ice Squad. Solidium Planet, FENL. After more than a minute with no response, Olivier knew that even the divination of the Empire has failed. Shadow, can you find the location of the manager of the launching pad? A few seconds later, a projection was shown by Shadow that displayed the room of the manager. It was a blue-skinned woman close to 5 meters tall. After seeing this, Olivier's body suddenly disappeared before reappearing in the same place. The space has been blocked so we cannot apparate. With a frown on her face, she said, Bloodsucker, sent an invisible drone outside to test the water. Bloodsucker followed her instruction and a small drone appeared in front of her. Under her control, the drone turned invisible before flying outside. The drone passed through the door as if it was not there. However, as soon as it appeared, it was shot down. Olivier frowned after seeing what happened to the drone. Logically speaking, the drone should not be detected. Whether it is the fair race's technology, or their inability to cast any detection spell, all of these should prevent them from detecting the drone. Not to mention that based on the video she just watched, all the soldiers immediately knew the existence and position of the drone. That was abnormal. Shadow, take over all the weapon systems in this facility and get rid of all the soldiers of Tier 3 and below. All the others, follow me to the manager's room. Without hesitation, Olivier and the other rushed outside the door. As soon as they appeared, they were welcomed by a rain of bullets. However, these attacks were useless to their armor, not to mention that they easily dodged them. Olivier rushed to the Tier 4 fair races. She faced 3 people, 2 of them with large hammers while the last one had a saber. With one glance, she judged that these weapons were made of the skins of dead fair people. At some point, a sword was in Olivier's hand. She dodged the attack of the first fair whose hammer created a more than dozen meters crater after hitting the ground. Olivier swung her sword at the opponent's head, however, the latter completely ignored her attack. He seemed to have the utmost belief in his defense. Unfortunately for him, this was the wrong move. As soon as the sword touched his head, it did not go through. However, a mist suddenly came from it, and before his companions could react, his head turned into an ice popsicle. With horror on his face, the fair race fell on the floor, his head shattered into millions of pieces. His other companions were furious as they swung their weapons madly. Meanwhile, with a calm demeanor, Olivier swung her sword upward. An ice spear suddenly appeared from the ground to impale the fair race with the saber. The other one dodged to the side, however, he quickly discovered an ice sword rushing towards him. Before he could even react, he was cut into 2 pieces. After she finished with her opponent, Olivier looked at the other team members. Wolf had turned into a more than 6 meters tall werewolf. His sharp teeth and claws slashed through the skin of these fair races like it was butter. Bloodsucker would use terrible speed to appear in front of her opponent, and with a touch of her finger, the blood inside their bodies would be instantly drained. As for Rogue, countless weapons appeared from his suit and he was frantically shooting left and right. After a few minutes, most of the assailants that were waiting for them were dead, and the team reunited. The blood of these fair people is not that bad, commented Bloodsucker after elegantly wiping her mouth. That's disgusting, replied Rogue, but he was ignored. Worthy of the title of Ice Queen, commented Shadow as he looked at his captain's handiwork. One of the luckiest things that happened to him was being chosen to be part of the same team as the famous Ice Queen of the Navy, especially after she did recently. Chapter 214 Elemental Awakening. Olivier Armstrong was a recruit of the Imperial Navy that joined a little over a year ago. In a short time, she displayed exceptional talent as an arcane aura master and reached Tier 3 in just 3 months. She broke countless records, both combat and non-combatant. She displayed an unprecedented leadership capability, so the Navy placed heavy emphasis on training her. Although the Empire appeared to be in a time of peace before this official war, this was only on the surface. As a form of training, the Space Marines will be sent to planets that are ravaged by magical beasts. These beasts are not only powerful but only know slaughter and destruction. The Imperial Navy has to kill these beasts as a form of training. Olivier, along with her team, was sent to one of these planets. During that time, she performed exceptionally and rose through the ranks. Then, after a year in the Navy, she advanced to Tier 4. And this was where her career began to accelerate. She discovered that reaching Tier 4, Aura Master can undergo a transformation that she named Element Awakening. As the name implied, any person who uses aura can have a certain elemental ability that does not require mana. Each person can only have one element so far, and Olivier's element is ice. This discovery brought great fame and honor to her. Many people who have aura master talent but no magic talent could now use elemental abilities like fire, water, wing, etc., with their aura energy. After learning of this, Edward also tested this element awakening process and awakening thunder as an element. Although he wanted space, he was still satisfied with it. More importantly, he used Oliver's discovery to garner prestige and honor for her in the military. That way, it would be easy to become the commander in the future. Additionally, around the same time that Olivier invented this new method, Snape along with many potion masters of the Empire finally created the Dragon Talent Potion that can increase a person's magic talent. He brewed one for her using the Water Dragon King Heart, then publicized to the public the discovery of this new potion by granting to her for all her service and merit to the Empire. Then, Edward told the public that as long as they have enough arcane merit, they can exchange this valuable potion. Additionally, every year, a lottery will be conducted to grant one ordinary individual of the Empire the potion, to give them a chance at changing their destiny purely based on luck. After killing the people who came after her, the team headed straight for the manager's room. In the process, they encountered waves after waves of fair people trying to stop them. However, these people were no match for such an elite team personally trained by Olivier. Additionally, with Shadow's control of the weapon system, mob tactics had little effect on this team. The manager tried to run away after guessing the intention of these people. Unfortunately, Shadow has already controlled the entire building. So, the team managed to capture the manager. Olivier did not waste time and immediately read this guy's memories. She wanted to know the reason that they were discovered. It turns out that the fair race has a very deep connection with the Earth and ores deep into the planet's crust. And amongst them, there are a few individuals known as priests who can connect to the planet's will and communicate with them. These priests are usually very intelligent and are the true people responsible for the scientific and technological development of the fair civilization. Because of this, these priests are the highest secrets of the fair race. They have high status not only because of their intelligence but also because of their detecting abilities. As long as they are stationed in one place, they can use the planet's will to detect any intruders. This is the reason that the metal ice team was discovered the moment they entered the building. These priests should be protected from divination by the planet's will, thought Olivers. However, the Empire's intelligence department should have still learned of their existence. So, either they were neglectful of their duties of the planet's will can also shield them beyond just divination. Additionally, these priests seem to have the basic ability to block the space since she could not apparate inside. Or maybe, they used the power of the planet will to do so. Olivier could guess that the fair race must be using this ability to study space technology. If they were given enough, they would most likely succeed and develop faster than light travel through this study. After thinking about all of this, Olivier quickly analyzed the situation and made a new plan for the mission. The first one is still to blow up this building and prevent the fair race from sending their fleet into space. The second is to act quickly and destroy all communication of this planet with the others to prevent the enemy from knowing their mission and sending reinforcements. Third, to capture a priest and bring it back to the Empire for study. After making a plan, Olivier asked Shadow to find the location of the priest. Unfortunately, the latter was nowhere to be found. So, she had to give up and proceeded to the next step. After exiting the launching pad, she detonated the bomb placed inside. Immediately afterward, the team apparat to the next launching pad. For the next few hours, Metal Ice Team not only destroyed all the launching pads on this planet, but also the communication towers. It is a shame that they did not capture a single priest. These people seem to be very good at hiding and running away. Once that was done, their team's mission was not over. Of the 7 planets controlled by the fair race, they had to destroy the launching pad of 6 of them, leaving only the main planet, Goldenite, intact. During the entire operation, the team would always be discovered by the priests once they entered important places of the fair people. Luckily, the team was prepared and acted accordingly. CM. They did not give their enemies any time to rest. In just 2 days, without any rest or sleep, they traveled to different planets occupied by the fair people and rendered their fleet useless. Only one planet was spared. Additionally, the team finally managed to capture a priest and brought it back. War Room. Edward was reading a preliminary report on the abilities of the fair priests. So far, only a small amount of information has been discovered, so he did not pay too much information about it. At least not yet. These priests might help him with Project Akashic Record. However, this has not been decided yet. So, he focused on this war. It's time for the second step. Chapter 215, Human vs. Machines. It did not take long for the Fair King to realize that something was wrong. After the communication was cut off to the other planets, he guessed that the so-called Arcane Empire that has declared war on them must have acted. So, another meeting was held to determine the next course of action. Because of their technology, the fair race did not have private spaceships that can travel between planets. They have to rely on the launching pads to set off their fleet. Luckily for them, one of the 7 planets that they have occupied was still intact. So, they unanimously voted to launch all the ships they currently have on an expedition to the other planets. According to the Council's prediction, all the other races that they have enslaved will most likely rebel, thus turning these colonies into chaos. Without support from other planets, this is the best opportunity for them to overthrow the fair race. After the decision was made, countless soldiers were called to arm, countless spaceships flew from planet Goldenite. However, something unexpected occurred. As soon as these fleets reached outside of the planet, they found a man dressed in black clothes, a staff in his hand, and wearing a hood floating in the vacuum of space. He seemed to be waiting for them. The commander of the fair fleet was quite surprised by this sight. Although the fair race has mana inside their bodies, it is only located in their skin, so they have no way of actively using it. Through intense training and combat, the fair race can passively absorb mana in the environment to increase their tiers. However, with each advancement, only their defense has drastically increased. If the priests did not theorize that mana could grant people power beyond imagination, beyond comprehension, he would have thought that this man was a god. My name is Gellert Grindelwald, an arcanist from the Arcane Empire. Prepare to be annihilated. His voice directly ignored the defense of the commander's ship and was sent directly to the latter's mind. An act that greatly surprised him. Is that the power of mana? Muttered the commander. If we can master this power, we will eventually become gods. Immediately, he ordered all the fleets to attack. Then, countless missiles, bombs, and grenades were launched at Grindelwald. The latter, however, just responded by placing a shield around him. Once the bombardment of more than 1,000 ships ended, Grindelwald was perfectly intact. However, a frown could be found on his face under the hood. A lot of my mana was used to block this attack, more than I anticipated. The reason he appeared was because of a mission. The Empire wanted to see whether Tier 5 individuals could stand up to a fleet. This was a test of humans against machines, individual power versus collective powers. Grindelwald raised his wand and 3 magic circles appeared in front of him. Arcane Rune Spell, Rock Summoning. Arcane Rune Spell, Reinforcement. Arcane Rune Spell, velocity acceleration. A bunch of rocks appeared in front of him, then, these rocks were reinforced. Finally, these rocks rushed at unprecedented speed. Wherever these rocks touched the fair spaceships, they would pass through as if they were Swiss cheese. Their shield proved to be useless. The commander ordered the team to use evasive maneuvers. This tactic worked, but they still lost dozens of ships in the process. Despite this, the commander ordered the soldiers to not stop the attack, no matter the cost. Bang! 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 Countless explosions occurred around Grindelwald, but his shield remained intact. He cast another spell. Arcane rune spell, Sectum Sempra. Myriad transparent slashes appeared and cut dozens more ships into many pieces. And this was not the end. Grindelwald began to use elemental spells. So, many ships were frozen into ice, along with all the soldiers inside. Some of them were destroyed by the explosion caused by the spell Fireblast. Gravity spell was used to smash many spaceships together. At this point in the battle, Grindelwald did not block these bombardments head-on but teleported at regular intervals to evade them. The fair commander was very calm while watching his fleet slowly being decimated by one man. His eyes twinkled with intense desire. Launch the nukes. Sir, is this approach a little unwise, said his second-in-command with a little trepidation. Why is that, asked the commander lightly. This person seemed to have the ability to teleport, it should be easy for him to evade. Order 100 of our ships to self-detonate. The shockwave should be powerful enough to temporarily block the space and prevent him from teleporting. We can use this opportunity to launch more than 1,000 nukes and kill him. Although the commander wanted to capture the enemy alive and learn the secrets of mana from him, the situation does not allow it. If he loses any more ships, his status in the council will be affected and his enemies can use this event to remove him from his position. The second-in-command flinched a little, but sir, it is the honor of these soldiers to fight and die for the preservation and future of our race, they should be ready for this. The second-in-command hesitated for a moment before giving the order. So, more than 100 ships rushed close to Grindelwald before exploding. The shockwave was powerful enough to send him flying away. And as the commander expected, Grindelwald could not apparate away. Immediately afterward, his face became contorted. He saw countless missiles rushing in his direction. His right activated and he instantly did short divination. He instantly knew these missiles were nukes. Since I cannot teleport right now, I need to survive the first wave of explosions until the space becomes stable enough. Then, he superimposed many shields on himself, mainly water shields to counter the heat in the explosion. Bang! Intense heat overwhelmed Grindelwald, trying to turn him into ashes. Cracks appeared on his shield but it still protected him for a few seconds. And the moment the space was no longer unstable, he used another spell. Arcane rune spell, space transfer. All the nukes, heat, nuclear radiation were teleported to a space far away. At least a couple of dozen light years away. Grindelwald was breathing heavily with sweat on his forehead. A good chunk of his mana was depleted. Then, a great deal of anger overcame him. Protego Diabolica. A giant blue dragon appeared behind him before rushing to the remaining fleet of the fair race. Everywhere the dragon went, everything was burned into ashes. In just a few minutes, the fire spread everywhere until nothing was remaining. After seeing this, Grindelwald sighed before controlling the fiend fire and preventing it from reaching the planets. Finally, he began to write a report, which was the real purpose of this battle. Based on the data acquired, it should be possible to use large fleets to kill powerful individuals with high tier. The goal of such a tactic is not to kill the individual, but to force them to deplete their mana and render them useless. It is estimated that a great number of low-level soldiers and ships will be sacrificed in the process. However, the Empire can use clones as replacements to ensure the safety of our soldiers. Additionally, this tactic may be only possible with tier 7 star level and might be ineffective against higher tiers. The report did not stop there but also mentioned tactics that should be guarded against. For example, if he wanted, he could have placed an invisible spell on himself to prevent the fair race from targeting him. Or, he could have used the Imperio spell to control the soldiers and have them shoot on each other. And so many more. The war arc is almost finished. Honestly, I'm not really satisfied with how it turned out. Hopefully, wars in the future will be better. Chapter 216, The Cruelty of the Universe. The Empire's 123rd Fleet surrounded the entire Blackwood star system. In all the 7 planets occupied by the fair race, thousands of ships could be seen surrounding them. When the fair people raised their heads, they could see the ships that covered the sky. Then, the communication system of these planets was hacked, showing a video of the commander of the fleet. My name is Cisco Fernandez de la Cruz, commander of the 123rd Fleet of the Arcane Empire. As he said these words, all the channels on these planets translated his words into the language of the fair race. As you can see, you are now surrounded and outmatched. As such, resistance is futile. Please surrender to ensure that no unnecessary casualties on your part. You have 5 hours to make a decision. After Commander Cisco made his declaration, the worldwide broadcast ended. Then, the fair people as a whole panicked. The ordinary people worry about the future, meanwhile, the people in power began to quickly assess the situation. They discovered that the web along with all the weapon systems on each planet was out of their control. So, a meeting of the highest caliber was upheld. Inside of the Empire's spaceships, Cisco was looking at the meeting of the Fair Council with a screen in front of him. "Sir, do you think that they will surrender?" asked the Vice Commander. "It does not matter." "What do you mean?" "The choice was never theirs to make," replied Cisco calmly. Immediately, the Vice Commander seemed to have thought of something and a look of fear appeared on his face before returning to calm. As the commander, Cisco was privy to some private information. For example, the majority of the Fair Council has been controlled through Imperius to vote against surrendering. As for the reason? There are many. The Fair race is very militant by nature. This can be seen by how many other races they have wiped out or enslaved when they conquer the Blackwood star system. So, even if they surrendered, it will most likely be temporary. They will become an unstable factor in the future. For them to properly surrender, they first need to be properly defeated, then instill great fear in them. This is one of the missions that Cisco was entrusted with. Of course, there are other reasons at play. The skin of the Fair race is harder than metals while also very malleable and flexible. It is very cheap, a great conductor of mana, and is very abundant. Not to mention that is easy to acquire. The Empire has already developed spells for them to shed their skin like snakes, then regrow them. A process that is quick, easy, and does not require much money. With their skin, more spaceships can be created, at a faster rate and cheaper price. And this is not all the value of their race. According to a recent study, although the Fair race has a very poor talent for magic, they are superb arcane master. With their powerful defense, they would make great soldiers. As such, the Empire has decided to not only use them to mine their skin but to incorporate them into the Empire and served as soldiers. After all, the Arcane Empire can be considered a multiracial country with many intelligent creatures that are not humans. However, before that, the militant nature of the Fair race has to be controlled, subdued. 5 hours later, as Cisco predicted, the council refused to surrender. The Fair King made a passionate speech to the public that their race was a race of conquerors, not the conquered. That even if they could not control their fleet, their soldiers can still fight to their last breath. Not long after the speech, Commander Cisco once again took control of the communication system. He showed a live broadcast of a fair planet called Ironal. Many ships surrounded the planet with a humongous one that was a few dozen kilometers in length and width. Inside that ship, Commander Cisco sat in his command seat with a calm look on his face as he said, "Commence the attack. Use the fire elemental cannon at full capacity." The Vice Commander paused for a brief moment. "Sir, which mode?" "Use the first mode first, followed by the second." "As you command, Eno." See. All the Fair people watched as a massive gun suddenly appeared under the humongous ship. Then, a red projectile was shot from it. With rapid speed, the projectile broke through planet Ironal's atmosphere and landed in a deserted place. Then, something that this race will never forget in their lives occurred. The memory of what happened that day will forever be ingrained into their souls, their bloodlines and passed down from generation to generation. The projectile that landed on the planet contained a large pocket dimension. And inside that dimension was a large quantity of fire element. The moment the projectile landed, the pocket dimension opened. A flame wave came out and traveled in all directions. Wherever the flame passed by, everything was burned to ash. Buildings were instantly incinerated. People were burned alive, with only their charred bodies showing that they once existed. Whether it was men, children, women, animals, or the elderly, no one was spared. Luckily for them, the pain was only a moment before they lost consciousness, sent into the eternal void that is death, with only a slight scream left as proof of their previous existence. The only ocean that existed on the planet was instantly boiled, killing all the fishes, plants, fungi, and all the different species living there. Mountains, glaciers, forests, plains, farms, historical monuments, libraries, museums, etc. Everything was instantly incinerated, turned into ashes. In just a few minutes, this planet full of wonders, cultures, history, and life was rendered into nothing, leaving only a scarlet world full of desolation. And this was not the end. You used the second mode of the cannon," said the Vice Commander with a hoarse voice. The ship fired a second shot. This time, the projectile was much faster and did not land on the planet but penetrated the core. Then, the dimension inside exploded, which led to another reaction with the core of the planet. Boom! Planet Ironal exploded into thousands of pieces that floated into space. The Fair race watched in horror, feeling intense grief and despair. Today, they finally understood the cruelty of the universe. They learned a very important truth: higher civilizations prey on weaker ones. Just like they used brute force and their advanced technology to conquer and annihilate other races in this star system, it was now their turn to share the same fate. Chapter 217 Strongest Will. Arcane Empire, Earth, the Imperial Palace. Edward sat in a chair with a screen in front of him. Just like the lucky few of the Fair race, he was also watching the live broadcast of the bombing. He watched as the fire devastated everything in its path. From women to children, to the elderly. He could hear their final scream before dying, echoing inside his mind, all 23 billion of them. Although he was countless light years away, the sound was very vivid to him, like he was in a front row seat at a concert. Before making the final decision, he thought of many excuses to justify his actions. For example, the fair race had committed many atrocities and this could be considered punishment for their previous actions. He convinced himself that this was a necessary action for the future of the empire. That his decision today will prevent countless suffering in the future. He even went as far as telling himself that he was not the one who pushed the final button, so all the blame cannot be placed on himself. However, in the end, he could not lie to himself. His decision was a calculated one. His journey as emperor will lead to a path of countless wars. By then, a mere planet being destroyed will be inconsequential. By then, galaxies and even universes will be at stake. If he cannot accept this now, then he should step down from his position. Did he regret the decision he made today? Yes. Would he still do it again given another chance? The answer is still yes. Edward has already made one of his main goals to spread the arcane empire throughout the entire universe and spread the pursuit of knowledge and truths to all races in the cosmos. To develop a civilization based on power and knowledge. That way, magic can develop at an unprecedented speed and to an unimaginable height by gathering the wisdom of thousands of races, which in turn allow him to reach the pinnacle of magic and discord its essence, its roots. Of course, one can make the argument that no one asked Edward to do this, no one asked him to spread civilization. And the reason he is doing this is because of his god complex. And to these people, Edward would say that they were right. But he would still not change his mind since he was already determined to walk down that path. Just like the purple mad titan said, the hardest choices require the strongest will, muttered Edward. He then remembered his aunt's warning to him that he should not become numb to these kinds of things, to the death of countless living creatures. He decided to keep these words to mind, to act as a constant reminder in the future. He waved his hand and a bottle of alcohol appeared on his hand. Without hesitation, he jugged the entire thing down his throat. Once he was done, another one appeared before repeating the process. Meanwhile, outside his room, all his wives stood outside the door with worried looks on their faces. He never drinks but now he is finishing bottles like they were water. Obviously, he's not fine, said Fleur. Then, what should we do? Should we go see him, asked Bellatrix. No, let him vent for tonight, replied Rowena. Knowing him, tomorrow morning, he will regain his normal self at least on the surface. There should be something more we can do, asked Luna. Edward is a very open person when it comes to his feeling. Give him a few days, then we can ask him and he will tell us, replied Olivier who secretly left the army to come here. Although she is the last one to become his wife, she has spent the most time with him back in her world. Even the time Rowena spent in the different timeline with Edward cannot be compared to her. So, she knew him best. So, the others nodded after hearing her proposition. Blackwood Star System. After watching the live broadcast, Commander Sisko's hand on his chair trembled. He clenched his hands really hard to focus, hoping the pain would calm him down, but it did not. At some point, his breathing was a little more difficult to control. A memory suddenly flashed inside his mind. It was when he was at the Marine Academy and learning about history. More specifically, the history of the old age. It was about the creator of the atomic bomb and how he regretted his action later on. When reading that part, Sisko always had a look of disdain towards Oppenheimer, thinking that he was a weak-willed man. However, today, Sisko could understand how he felt. Thinking about all the lives that die under his action, he instantly felt like he was about to have a panic attack. Nevertheless, Sisko was still an elite properly trained. So, he instantly cast a mechanized mind spell on himself, thus entering an emotionless and logical state of mind. He then ordered his men to once again broadcast his face to the fair people. With a calm voice, Sisko said, "As you can all see, this is the repercussions of your decisions. According to the law of the Empire, a second chance will be granted to your species. Surrender of face extinction." This time, the Fair Council did not hesitate to surrender. In front of such a powerful force, they were simply incapable of resisting. The next day, Edward dressed luxuriously, wore his crown, and headed to Blackwood Star System to meet the delegates of the fair race and sign their surrendering treaty. As he sat on a golden throne, looking at the fair king and a few council members, he briefly read their minds. He could feel their fear, hatred, and disgust for him. And some of them were even thinking of the possibility of taking this opportunity to either kill him or take him as a prisoner. Edward suddenly used the spiritual pressure spell, releasing a powerful pressure that not only prevented all of these people from moving, breathing, and even thinking. Immediately afterward, they removed the little rebellion thoughts that they had in their minds. For starting this war and your resistance, your species will be classified as second-class citizen, with limited rights and powers, said Edward calmly. However, everything is not hopeless. As long as you served in the military and earn enough merit for the Empire, all of you will eventually become regular citizens. By then, you will get access to education, magic, long lifespan, great healthcare, and many more. The Fair Council was a little surprised by this decision, they were all prepared to become slaves for their entire lives, just like they did to the conquered races of their star system. Of course, they also knew that their lives from now on will not be easy. Fortunately, they now had hoped. Although they did not know whether this arcane emperor would keep his words, it was better than nothing. Truth be told, Edward never planned to enslave the fair race. He knew that it was very difficult to enslave any intelligent race as they would eventually rebel. No matter how long it took, no matter whether it succeeded, it would eventually happen. The only way to enslave another intelligent race is to systematically change their way of thinking and make them believe that it was their honor to be enslaved, to serve their conqueror, just like the house elves. Another method would be to use a powerful bloodline curse to enslave them. However, this kind of method is not absolute as there is a high chance for such magic to have problems over time. Not to mention the possibility of some genius being born in the fair race and finding a way to remove the said curse. So, Edward decided to use another approach. First, made the fair race suffer a little, have them work hard for their freedom so that they can appreciate it. While working for their freedom, slowly instill a yearning for the life of real citizens by showing them all the benefits and advantages. Finally, when they gain their freedom, slowly forge their identity as people of the empire and integrate into it. Although the process will be long and slow, it is the best method that will lead to fewer issues in the future. And, I know that every time I try to give Edward any form of weakness, display of emotions or character growth, or generally trying to add some complexity to his character, a lot of people began to complain that he is acting out of character. So, I usually try to stay away from these kinds of moments. But recently, I realized how bland of a character he was and decided to add a little human touch to him. FVC. Additionally, the new world is coming in like the next chapter or two. I am a little disappointed with the war arc in general but still satisfied with the end. Chapter 218 Unexpected Visitor. After going over the terms of the surrendered, the Fair Council finally signed the treaty in a live broadcast. Both the fair race and the citizen of the empire watched this momentous occasion. Finally, Edward gave a televised speech promising the fair people that once they paid off their crimes and become first-class citizens, they will not only regain their freedom but also live better lives. He promised them a better tomorrow for their entire race. This speech was passionate and Edward used all his linguistic skills to rally the emotions of the people, making them both ashamed for their previous behavior and giving them hope for a better life after repenting. Once everything was done, he dismissed a lot of the spaceships from the fleet, leaving only a few. Then, a group of arcanists was brought over from the Empire to begin to install warp gate in each of the 6 habitable planets of this star system. That way, it was easier for the Empire to reach the Blackwood star system and for the fair people to reach the solar system. However, Edward did not allow any of their race to go to the solar system, nor did he allow any citizen to come here. After all, the fair race has just experienced a catastrophic event that would forever influence and affect their entire species. No matter how eloquent Edward spoke, no matter how convincing his words may be, it cannot instantly eradicate the hatred of the fair race. So, for now, it is best for the 2 different species not to directly interact. After a few years, when this event has diluted somewhat to the fair people's memories, then the 2 races can begin to communicate and exchange. In the meantime, the Empire will take control of the fair race's media and begin to popularize the living conditions of the people of the Empire. They glamorize, romanticize, and glorify the identity of the first-class citizens, then constantly play these messages to the fair race as a form of brainwashing. The Empire will now be in charge of the fair race's education, targeting the younger generation of their race as they are more malleable. Their history will be rewritten or revised to focus on the barbaric nature of the fair people, especially what they did to the other races and the fact that they attacked the Empire first even though they brought peace and civilization to them. Essentially, guilting the young fair that they deserve their current situation, and only by working hard for the Empire can they have a brighter future. And these are just some of the basic policies that will be used. Many council members of the Empire even asked Edward to spread religion to the fair race as a way to better control them. However, he was not a big fan of religion in general, so he forfeited the idea. After all, the fair race will one day become a great asset to the Empire once they truly integrate into it. And having their minds shackled by religions might be contradictory. Truth be told, these methods are not directed solely at the fair race but countermeasures that have been discussed and refined by the think tanks to be used against intelligent conquered races of the Empire in the future. After all, Edward never planned for the Arcane Empire to be one dominated by humans, but one of many ethnicities, races, or species. He plans to use the advantage of each species to make up for the deficiency of the others. That way, with the diverse background of the Empire, it will be able to deal with complex issues or problems. This method will also facilitate the more rapid development of magic and technology. Once Edward was done dealing with some basic issues of the treaty signing, he began to visit the other planets occupied in the fair race to get a feeling of how things were going. During his visit, he paid some attention to the other races that the fair have enslaved. Unfortunately, the majority of these species were on the brink of extinction because of the low number of their races. Additionally, based on previous reports Edward has read, only one of them is of much value to the Empire. And that is an animal species referred to as mole rate race. This rate species is not a magical race but has evolved to become master of digging. This species will be great for mining, and cost cheaper than golems. However, they have to be properly domesticated, trained, and their population has to grow for a while. Of course, once their DNA is completely studied, they can be cloned to fasten the speed of their recuperation. After the inspection, Edward returned home. The media was still talking about this breath war, praising this military victory of the Empire. They also emphasized that the universe was a scary place, and at any time, war with another race or faction can break out. So, the Empire has to continue developing as fast as possible while always being alert from any threat from beyond the stars. When it comes to the destruction of planet Ironal, the incident was introduced briefly and not dwell that much on it. Of course, some people were not happy about the use of such weapons of mass destruction. There were even some minor protests. However, the media coverage of these things was minor to the point of non-existence. People were more focused on this new sense of patriotism that this war brought them. So, although the war was short, but also very impactful. Imperial Palace. Edward was having dinner with his family. The previous night, he had a conversation with his wives, and he poured out everything that was on his mind. And after talking to someone, after sharing his burden, he did feel a little better. His wives could empathize with him because they all knew that at some point in the future, as members of the royal family, they will have to make similar choices as him, especially Olivier, since she will be the commander of the navy. When that time comes, no one will be there to make the choice for them or alleviate their guilt. However, as long as someone can understand and relate to their struggle, then things will be slightly easier. Everyone was present during the dinner, including Edward's parents, aunt, Olivier, and Susan. Everyone was laughing, talking about mundane things and not worrying about war or politics. It was a very peaceful dinner. And Edward relished these kinds of quiet moments that allow him to forget everything and just relax. He usually feels at peace in these moments. Unfortunately, the peace was disrupted. W.L. Co. A small elf with purple hair suddenly appeared in the middle of the table. Edward frowned after seeing this, as he knew that Morgana would not disturb him unless the situation was urgent. "What is it?" he asked. "I just intercepted a message that was trying to take over our communication system and broadcast it to every screen in our solar system. Do you know who sent it?" "From what I deciphered, it's from the Galactic Federation," replied Morgana with a little worried on her small face. Chapter 219 Galactic Federation. "Show me the message," said Edward. Then, under Morgan's control, a small screen appeared in the middle of the table with words written in the universal language. The message read, "According to Article 23, Section B of the Galactic Federation Law, it is prohibited to use weapons of mass destruction to destroy a planet full of intelligent life, especially when there is a vast difference between the level of civilization. Based on data at hand, the Arcane Empire is a level 6 civilization while the Fair Race is a level 4 civilization. This difference in level does not require the use of weapons of mass destruction to settle any dispute. As such, a delegate will be sent from the Federation to uphold a trial to uphold the Arcane Empire responsible for their actions. Based on the findings of the delegate, the appropriate punishment will be given." The dining room became quiet after hearing this, as everyone focused on the meaning of those words. Edward squinted his eyes as he digested the information in front of him. "See, are we in trouble?" asked Susan. "No, we have already expected this," replied Amelia. "The law of the Galactic Empire is public knowledge, so we anticipated this happen when attacked the Fair Race." "Then, how will we deal with this situation?" she asked back. However, Amelia did not answer this time and just looked at Edward, who was still in deep thought. Before the war, he was also worried about the Galactic Federation, so he tried to gather as much information as possible. From his findings, the Galactic Federation or Intergalactic Federation is a large organization that probably exists in the entire universe. He went to a few near galaxies and could find branches there. Despite their scale, he only learned a little bit about their origins, and it is just some rumors. According to these rumors, the Federation was created by a few powerful gods from the center of the universe. Their purpose is to maintain the stable development of low-level civilization and ensure that every race or species in the universe has a chance to grow and develop in a stable environment. In simple words, their purpose is to maintain the peace and stability of the universe. Of course, Edward does not believe this for even a second. He even suspected that some gods were using this organization as a front to discover weak races or factions to establish their religion and spread their faith. Unfortunately, he could not gather more information as the headquarters of the Federation is located at the center of the universe. However, this was a place that he was not yet prepared to go. From what little information he gathered, this was the place with the most abundant mana. As a result, many Tier 10 universal gods were fighting and competing with one another. In fact, if a race of group did not have a Tier 10 individual or weapon, it was almost impossible to survive, let alone thrive in that place. "Edward, what are we going to do?" asked Olivier directly. You guys do not have to worry that much about this, he replied. The Galactic Federation is the epitome of bullying the weak and fearing the strong. With how complex the different factions of the universe are, with gods, ancient races, and powerful casters, how could they control so many races and factions? When it comes to high-level civilization, once they break the rules, the Federation will just have them pay a fee to maintain their facade of peacekeeping, and these civilizations will show some degree of respect for the people behind the Federation and pay the fee. So, as long we show them our strength, they will leave us alone after we pay them, asked Olivier. That's correct. Wait, aren't we just level 6 civilization, asked Susan. Is that enough to scare them? How are the levels classified anyway? It's actually a rude and simple system based on the tier system. For example, if a group, faction, or race has a tier 6 planet-level individual or weapon, they are a level 6 civilization. If they have a tier 7 star individual or weapon, they are a level 7 civilization. So, we are considered a level 6 civilization because we have the power to destroy a planet? Indeed, this is a very rude and basic system, commented Hermione. So what level of civilization are we actually, asked Susan. Technically speaking, we are a level 9 civilization, however, only under certain circumstances. Realistically, we are only level 7, replied Edward. That's only one level higher than they recorded us, is that enough to scare them away, replied Susan. The Milky Way galaxy is very far away and considered almost a barren place. In terms of strength, it is only on the middle lower level. So, the highest level of civilization is 8, and only a handful of them exist. At least on the surface, it appears so. Everyone nodded in relief after hearing that the situation was not as bad as they thought. However, Olivier still said, "This event shows that the general situation of the Empire has changed. At the very least, our existence is known or has caught the attention of a few powerful people." "That's true," replied Edward. "However, as long we keep this pace of development, we can deal with most situations." Olivier frowned after hearing this. "Are you prepared to leave again?" "Yes. I wanted to wait a while but the situation is changing faster than anticipated." Edward then looked at Luna. "Could you predict when the people of the Federation are coming?" She nodded her head before waving her hand and a crystal ball appeared floating in front of her. Her eyes completely turned white as if she did not have any pupils. Then, her hair also turned white. A noble and mysterious aura emanated from her body, making anyone who looked directly at her feel awe and reverence. A few minutes later, she returned to normal and said, 3 years, 145 days, and 12 hours from now, a Tier 6 individual that has a connection to the Federation will come to our solar system with a group of delegates. However, my prediction also said that there may be some unknown variables. Most likely, a higher tier individual with anti-divination ability. 3 years? This should be more than enough time, muttered Edward. After that, the dinner continued as the group avoided talking about these heavy topics. Afterward, Edward's mother was reluctant to watch her son go, so he spent the next month on vacation with her and his father. He traveled to many places in the galaxy, saw many wonderful sights, met different races. In general, it was quite enjoyable. As for the affairs of the Empire, he left them to his aunt. This time, 3 other people were coming with him on this trip: Hermione, Snape, and Lily. However, before leaving, he had 2 things to deal with. The first one was sending a warning to the people that were labeled as problematic in the Empire based on profile analysis. Late at night, Grindelwald secretly visited these people and warned them that if something happened during Edward's absence, no matter whether they were responsible for it or not, they will suffer the consequences. That way, these people will ensure that nothing goes wrong. Additionally, Edward gave Grindelwald the power to remove any instability to the Empire in his absence. Using the power of his Gate of Truth, Edward can communicate with a clone of his from other universes. So, he told his aunt to wake up the clone in case she really needed him. Bermuda Triangle Pocket Dimension. Edward looked at Rowena and Luna before asking, "Are you sure you guys do not want to wait for the second floating city to be built before leaving?" "It will take too much time," replied Rowena. "The previous floating city used resources gathered by the Empire for decades to be built. For a second one to be created, a large amount of resources is required, which would take at least another decade. The World Gate is more than enough," she added. "With her talent and the power of the gate, it is more than enough to travel across the multiverse safety-wise. Be safe. If you encounter any real trouble, ask for help. Whether it is Grindelwald, Flammel, Flitwick, and even Dumbledore, I already talked to them and they will come to your rescue. And if things really get messy, contact me and I will cut my trip short." Rowena and Luna nodded their head, kissed Edward goodbye before hopping on the gate, and left for their multiversal adventures. Edward said his goodbyes to Olivier, who was staying in the Navy to build her career. He then placated Fleur and Bellatrix, who were complaining about not going on this trip. He promised them to take them in the next one. Finally, he hopped into his floating city and entered the void. His second adventure in another universe began. Hopefully this time he will not encounter a scary and powerful world. Chapter 220, New World. Unlike his first voyage, Edward felt safer this time because of the floating city. Now, he had more layers of protection. Nevertheless, he knew that the void was a very scary place and should not be careless. The floating city might be a decently powerful weapon in most universes, but it is nothing in the void. At best, it can ensure that he can run away relatively intact when needed. So, after his departure, he drank a bottle of Felix Felicis to ensure his luck. Not just him, but all the other members accompanying him as well. The voyage this time did not take 100 years, it only took 1 year. The reason for that is that Edward already had a world coordinate. Long before leaving his confrontation with truth and running away from the Full Metal Alchemist world, he designed countless probes that he sent into the void to discover new universes. And amongst them, one of them discovered a coordinate not long after he returned home a few years ago. After traveling to his destination, Edward once again found himself staring at a crystal-looking wall. "Is this what you called the source wall?" asked Snape as he looked at this wonder. Although he had seen before from his homeworld, it seemed different when looking at a different universe. And it was not just him that was fascinated. Whether it was Hermione or Lily, the past year has been quite a shock and intrigue for them. Although the void is nothing but endless white gray on sight, it is still a magical place to look at. Not to mention the meaning behind its existence, this was a place that exists outside of space and time, the gap between an infinite amount of universe with different rules or laws that govern them. As arcanists, it is in their bones to discover the truth behind anything new or unknown. So, they really would like to study the void and uncover its mystery. It's a shame that it was not currently the time, nor were they powerful enough for such a thing. "Hopefully, we will be lucky this time," said Edward. "What do you mean?" asked Hermione. "Well, the worst-case scenario is that this is a powerful world and we are discovered the moment we enter. This would make this trip extremely dangerous. The second worst possible scenario is that this is a regular world that does not allow any mystery or magic. In that case, our trip would have been in vain as such a world is completely useless. Is there a way to check before entering?" "Yes," replied Edward. Morgana sent in the sorcerer eyes. Soon, one small orb the size of a basketball was sent out of the floating city, it fused with the source wall and entered this world. A few minutes later, an image was projected in front of everybody. The small satellite referred to as Sorcerer Eyes only floated in the sky. According to orders, it waited a few minutes before acting. After not being destroyed or attacked, it began to scan its surroundings. "It appeared that we are on Earth, in the 1920s, in America," said Morgana. She quickly controlled the Sorcerer Eye to go to different libraries and gain access to as much knowledge as quickly as possible. To be precise, it is 1926, and so far, this is a very normal world. "Did you discover any form of other energy? Or any different dimensions?" asked Edward with a frown. "So far, not a single thing. This does not mean that these things did not exist, it could mean that the energy level is too low to be detected, or that the Sorcerer Eye was not powerful enough to detect these things. Do a basic divination on whether there is any magic or anything related to mysticism in this world. And if so, the location." The Sorcerer Eye was capable of doing basic divination spells without any diviners taking control of it. "There is a positive answer, one near the Amazon forest while the other in Egypt." Edward was satisfied with this finding. Even if this world is a low-level magic world where fantasy has almost been extinct, he can still gain something from it. Plus, a non-fantasy world is not as useless as he said, there are many ways to exploit it and gain many benefits. "In that case, let's enter. We will divide into 2 groups, Hermione and I will go to check out the Amazon forest, Lily and Snape can go to Egypt." He then looked at Snape and Lily. "You guys need to disguise your clothes to fit the time. You can use magic if necessary but do not go overboard. Contact me if something unexpected occurs." The floating city entered the world and landed on the moon while entering stealth mode. Meanwhile, the group was teleported to their designated places. As soon as they landed, Hermione frowned. "My mana is restricted to tier 2. She felt uncomfortable being so drastically weakened. "So is mine. This is because the law of this universe is different from ours and we need time to adapt," replied Edward as he took out a compass pointing in a certain direction. "We have to be careful in our current situation as some modern weapon is effective against us now," he said as he followed the compass. Soon, Edward found himself in a river. In the distance far away, he could see an old boat that could be described as hanging on its last leg. He cast the spell Eagle Eye on himself to see in the distance. In the boat, there were 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman. One of the men was muscular while the other was thin. Instantly, he recognized the muscular man and the woman. One looked similar to Dwayne Johnson while the other looked like Emily Blunt. However, he could not remember any movies these two made together. So, this is likely a movie that he never saw, or came out after his death in 2019. One of his worst fear has happened, he did not know the plot and take advantage of it. However, he quickly calmed down and decided to take things one step at a time. Immediately after, he and Hermione apparat on the small, shocking the people inside. Edward's position appeared to be close to Emily Blunt's character, and her first instinct was to punch him in the face. "A little too excited, aren't we?" said Edward as he caught her fist. "How did you get here?" "And who are you guys?" she asked in shock and with weariness. "Fate has brought us here," replied Edward. "As for who we are, my name is Edward Bones, and this is my wife, Hermione Granger." The muscle man was called Frank, and he appeared beside Emily Blunt's character along with the thin one. He was holding a metal bar in his hand, looking quite menacing. The boat was momentarily silent. "I think this is the part where you guys introduce yourself." However, no one answered him, they just looked at him with vigilance. "So, your name is Dr. Lily Houghton. You brought your brother halfway across the world on a journey to find a mystical plant known as the Tear of the Moon, rumored to be capable of healing any diseases and removing all curses. And this muscular man is a skipper named Frank that you hired to be your guide during this expedition. How do you know all of this?" asked Dr. Houghton. "Are you with the Germans?" "No, I just read your mind," replied Edward. "Nonsense," she replied. "See, really? Think of a number between 1 and a billion, and I will tell you what number you picked." After looking her in the eyes, he said, 123, 234, 546. Still not convinced, "Pick another number." Dr. Houghton had a stubborn look on her face, then, Edward said, "You're not thinking of any number. Instead, you are reciting words for words a book about herbology that you once read." This time, she was truly surprised. However, Edward suddenly looked at Frank with a weird look on his face. "Why can't I read your memories?" His eyes seemed to be able to penetrate all secrets, making Frank really uncomfortable. "Interesting," muttered Edward. "Is that?" Chapter 221 Frank. "You're actually cursed," said Edward with great interest. "I've never seen this kind of curse before. However, the magic seems slightly similar to Native American tribe magics found in the Amazon." "I do not know what you're talking about," said Frank. Nevertheless, Edward's interest was piqued. Not only because of the curse but also because of the fact he could not use legilimency on Frank. When he reads his mind, all he could see was a forest with a large lake on it. Nothing more, nothing else. With a smile on his face, he said, "From what I learned about you from Dr. Houghton's memory, you seem to be a person who requires money. How about I pay you and you tell me about your curse and let me study it?" After saying that, Edward snapped his finger and 10 bars of gold more than 20 centimeters long appeared on the boat. Frank's eyes lit up after hearing this, took one of the gold bars and bit it. "How did you make so much gold appear out of nowhere?" asked McGregor, who was the thin man and also Dr. Houghton's brother. "Magic," replied Edward. "Magic is real?" asked his sister. "Since curses exist, of course, magic does as well." "Wait, Frank, you're cursed?" asked Dr. Houghton. She appeared quite excited at the prospect of seeing both magic and a cursed individual. "It's a long story," replied Frank, who was the only person who was not surprised at Edward's use of magic. He then looked at the latter. "Are you serious?" "Of course. Plus, I may be able to help you lift the curse." "I thought you could not read my mind." "I do not need to read your mind to guess such obvious intentions." After pondering for a moment, Frank took the fold bars to the deck of the ship. After returning, he told his story. More than 400 years ago, he was the cartographer of a Spanish expedition full of conquistadors who traveled to South America in search of something called Lagrimas de Cristal tree or Tears of the Moon. The petal of this magical tree, when processed properly, is said to be able to slow down aging, cure any disease and break any curse. The leader of this expedition, Don Aguirre, wanted the petal of this tree to save his only daughter whom he loved dearly. Without her, his life held no meaning. During this expedition, the majority of Aguirre's conquistadors died because of the jungle, whether it was snakes, poisons, fatigue, or diseases. In the end, the remaining ones were on the brink of death, their bodies damaged beyond repairs. Luckily for them, they were saved by the Pucamaicuna tribe with the flower of the tree, nursing them back to perfect health. Aguirre then demanded the location of the tree from the chief of the tribe, and when the latter refused, he stabbed them in the back and killed all the people of the tribe, and burned their village. Frank, whose real name was Francisco Lopez de Heredia, did not agree with Aguirre's action. Although they were raised together since young and were like brothers, he still tried to defend the Pucamaicuna people. However, he was stabbed by the latter instead. Luckily for Frank, the chief of the tribe cast a curse on the group that would grant them immortality at the cost of being unable to leave the Amazon River, or they will be brought back by the jungle itself. "Frank, I cannot believe you have lived for more than 400 years, that must have been really hard," said Dr. Houghton. 395 years, 5 months, and 13 days, replied Frank. "It was indeed hard but I managed." Edward patted his shoulder. "As a fellow immortal, I understand your pain." "You're also immortal?" "I've lived for more than 200 years. Not just me, but my wife is also immortal. Don't look how young she is, she's actually over 60 years old, ouch." Edward felt a small hand pinching the muscles on his side. He finally remembered that although both he and Hermione had their mana and aura drastically suppressed, her current body was still powerful enough to wrestle with an elephant. "I know that a woman's age is taboo, so I'm sorry," pleaded Edward, which finally granted him armistice. "So, what do you think about this curse? It seems very similar to a Horcrux. Most likely, his soul is bound to the Amazon River instead of a magical artifact, thus granting him his immortality," replied Hermione. The real question is whether only part of his soul is bound or the entire thing. This could explain the reason why his mind is full of only rivers and forests. A small wooden wand suddenly appeared in Edward's hand and he looked at it with nostalgia. Ever since his battle with Dumbledore, he never used a short wand again. In the Empire, children between the age of 11 to 17 will still use the short wands as assistants, however, they are taught not to rely too deeply on it to develop their magic veins. After graduation, they will usually forge a long wand for themselves with the short wand as the core. Of course, some people preferred to use things like guns as wands. The reason that Edward was using this wand now was to conserve his mana. The restriction of the world was still prevalent and using a wand will help preserve mana when casting spells. He wanted to be safe than sorry. A white light came from the 9-inch wooden wand and entered Frank's body. It was checking for something. FEO. His soul is not in his body, said Edward as his eyes twinkled. He had never seen someone who was perfectly fine and functioning properly without a soul. How fascinating, he muttered. What exactly will happen if you try to leave the river? The trees in the forest will come alive and drag me back, replied Frank. Let's do a small test, said Edward after nodding his head. He placed his hand on Frank's shoulder, then, they disappeared. What just happened? Asked Dr. Houghton. They've teleported away, replied Hermione. Is this magic? It's wonderful. Are there many magicians like you two in the world? Why? Interested, replied Hermione with a smile. Indeed. I'm just wondering how many people magic could save, how much better the world would be. You could probably solve world hunger, diseases, famines, and so many things. Indeed, magic can do all these things, replied Hermione calmly. But you also have to understand that there is a dark side to everything. Just like it can save the world, magic can also destroy it. Dr. Houghton became momentarily silent after hearing this as she knew that this was true. For example, if magic fell in the hands of the Germans. With the current ideologies that are rapidly spreading in their country, this would be a true catastrophe to the world. While deep in thought, Edward and Frank suddenly appeared back. However, Frank looked like a statue at this point. Edward waved his wand and the water from the river rose from the ground and drenched Frank. As a result, he slowly returned to normal. Did we just instantly arrive in London and return to the Amazon in the span of a few minutes? Edward smiled at him without saying anything. He was truly interested in this curse. He knew that he could learn something from it, especially regarding the soul. However, he still had time. He looked at Dr. Houghton. Dr. Houghton, call me Lily. I have a friend named Lily and it would be very confusing to call you that. How about Olivia? No, my 6th wife is called Olivier, it's too close. How about Livy? You have 6 wives? You must really get around. Unfortunately, that's true. Dr. Houghton did not really care about Edward's practice of polygamy. Her brother was shunned by British society because of his sexual orientation, but she still loves him for who he is. So, she would not judge someone else's lifestyle. Of course, she was a firm believer in monogamy but she respected his choice, it was just not for her. You can't just change my name because it is inconvenient. You don't like Livy? How about Lilith? That's a good name. From now on, I'll call you Lilith. I refuse. It's either that or I call you Pants like Frank. In that case, I'll call you Playboy. Fine by me, replied Edward calmly. The arrowhead that you have should be the key to find the Tears of Moon. I am very interested in this magical tree. Can you let me see it? I might be able to discover something. Can you stop reading my mind? That seems very impolite and an invasion of privacy, replied Lilith as she removed the arrowhead that hung on her neck like a necklace and handed it to him. Chapter 222, The Power of the Curse. Can't you solve the curse? Asked Frank. Over his long years, he has searched everywhere for the location of the Tears of the Moon but never discovered anything. If it was not his personal experience, he would have thought that the tree was nothing but a legend. As long as I find the place your soul is stored in the jungle, it should be possible to reverse the curse. However, this would take a lot of time, replied Edward. If it was any regular curse, a potion made of unicorn blood could be used to remove it. However, something similar to Horcrux requires more delicate measures. So, the fastest way is to find the Tears of the Moon. Of course, one of the main reasons is that Edward was quite interested in that tree and wanted to see if it was as magical as the legend. After receiving the arrowhead from Lilith, he looked at it intensely. There were many images engraved on it as if telling a story. It was a language that used hieroglyphics. After rummaging through his mind, Edward found a language that is similar to the one on the arrow, then translated it. The Tears of the Moon possess the power to cure anything. To prove yourself worthy, you must turn water to stone. Then mend a broken heart. For tears to bloom, the great tree must be under the rare crying moon. The tree hides where the moon bled. It sank into the west, over the heart of the serpent. Where the fong bites its own tail. As soon Edward finished his rough translation, Dr. Lilith rushed to her map and looked at it. One particular spot of the river on the map looked like a snake biting its own tail. No wonder no one never discovered the tree, they have been searching in the wrong spot. It's not in La Grimace de Cristal. It's in La Luna Rhoda. Lilith was very excited about this discovery, but so was Frank. To many people, achieving immortality might be a blessing. But, he has been stuck in this place for almost 400 years, he was sick and tired of it. He dreamed of traveling to the world, of seeing the development of society after so many years. He dreamed of owning and driving a car, and many small things do not mean anything for most people, but a great deal to him. In 3 days, there will be a lunar eclipse, which according to the translation, is the only time that the tree blooms, commented Edward. So, let's hurry, said Lilith with a smile on her face. Frank, where is that luxurious bath you promised? Is it under the ship? No, it's out there, replied Frank as he pointed to the river. Meanwhile, Lilith looked at him as if she wanted to slap him. Obviously, she was lied to when Frank advertised himself and his boat. What about food? Do you have any since someone threw away all my reserves in the harbor? Asked McGregor. Frank took out his pistol and shot it in the sky. A rat fell in front of him. I'm not eating this, said McGregor. Frank ignored him and threw the rat on the river, then, countless fishes came to the rat to devour it. Piranha. Better eat them than they eat you. Edward looked at the piranha and said, although I have eaten many strange things, but all of them have been prepared by the best chefs and with the utmost care. He looked at Hermione and said, you take care of the food, and I'll take care of our residence and baths. What are you in the mood for? I can go for Italian food. Hermione then looked at the others. What about you guys? Anything specific you want to eat? Anything, asked McGregor with great enthusiasm. After Hermione nodded her head, he began to describe a list of things that he would like to eat. After quite the list, Lilith chose a normal British diner. Feo. Co. What about you, Frank? After pondering for a while, Frank ordered a mixture of Spanish and Algerian food. Hermione nodded her head before disappearing in front of everybody. Meanwhile, Edward entered one of the rooms underneath this depolate boat. An hour later, he returned to the deck and brought everybody. Then, a look of shock could be seen on the faces of the three. The small cabin underneath this small boat turned into a large mansion with many rooms. There were baths, pools, luxurious rooms, a small forest, and many more. How is that possible? Said McGregor as he left the room and entered, wondering why this place was bigger on the inside than the outside. Have you guys never seen Doctor Who and the TARDIS? Why are you surprised? Asked Edward. To him, this was a basic application of the extension curse and transfiguration. Doctor Who? What's that? Oh right, the show has not been invented until 1963, he muttered. Hermione is back with the food. Let's go to the dining room, then each of you can take a room for yourselves. Once the group arrived, they saw a table full of food. McGregor was the first to sit down and began to eat. He even gave up his gentleman attitude and reveled in his food. The past few days have been hell for him who is used to living a luxurious life. Now, he finally felt that he was back to civilization. Magic can create food, asked Lilith as she wondered how useful this kind of thing would be to the world, to end world hunger. No. We can accelerate the growth of food, or summon it from somewhere else. But we cannot make it out of thin air, explained Hermione. That's still very useful. Then, the entire group had a great dinner, then everybody took a bath in their private bath, before sleeping in their chosen rooms. While everyone slept, Hermione and Edward were studying Frank's blood and the curse. The next day, the group continued to their destination. Edward saw that their route was in the direction of a waterfall. He immediately began to worry about the safety of the ship. Based on its current shape, the ship might fall apart at any time. So, he pointed his wand at it and said, Reparo. Immediately afterward, the boat appeared to have returned back in time. All the holes in it began to repair, the paint became brand new, and even the engine returned to their pristine state. Frank looked at everything that was occurring. Okay, magic is too convenient. He built this boat with his own hand, and it has been with him for too many years to count. But, he never saw his boat this new, even when he first created it. With this new boat, the process of passing by the waterfall was smooth and easy. That way, the group saved a 2-day journey. Then, Frank brought them to meet his friends who were members of the Pukamai-kuna. After seeing these people, Edward gave Frank a weird look, and later secretly placed his hand on his mouth, signaling him not to say anything. From these people's minds, he knew that they were supposed to work with Frank to basically scam Lilith and her brother. Of course, now, Frank did not plan to do so. After meeting with the chief of the tribe, Edward immediately asked her if there were still remains of magic amongst their people. Unfortunately, she told him that after the incident with Aguirre, the chief of the tribe back then did not have the opportunity to pass on his magic legacy to his daughter before dying. As such, magic has been lost in their tribes. Edward was slightly disappointed. However, he still had a solution. As long as his body recuperate, he can use the floating city to cast a time record to peer into the past and maybe learn something. While talking to the chief, both Edward and Hermione felt something, so they instantly stood up while pointing their wands. What's going on? Asked the others. However, the two were too focused to respond as they tried to feel the surroundings. Hermione suddenly threw a white light that seemed to be heading for a member of the tribe. However, the light actually hit a bunch of trees that moved on their own. Then, everybody realized why these two were on guard. 4 men showed up, to be precise, 4 anomalies. One of them had snakes coming out of his body, one was completely made of trees, one was made of bees and honey, while the last one was made of swamps. Impossible, said Frank. Do you know them? Asked Lilith. That's Aguirre, he should have been trapped. Meanwhile, Edward focused on the 4 men, focusing on the 2 who were made of honey and swamp. He waved his wand and 2 stones flew from the ground heading to these 2 with rapid speed. This rock should have pierced their bodies, killing or at least severely injuring them, but they went through them instead. Immediately, Edward's eyes lit up. Chapter 223, Tears of the Moon. Did you think of something? Asked Hermione. She knew that her husband had countless wild ideas inside his mind, and inspiration often came to him at any moment. Indeed. However, let's test a few things first. Attack as if you wanted to destroy them. Edward first used the severing charm, Defindo, on these people, severing them into 2 pieces. Immediately afterward, their bodies reconnected by themselves as if nothing occurred. Magic? Asked Aguirre asked in Spanish, finally removing his focus from Frank. Nevertheless, what responded to him was Hermione's fire-making spell, Incendio. Aguirre and his men were instantly turned to ashes. Nevertheless, in just a few seconds, they returned to life. A bunch of snakes appeared to form Aguirre's body along with his armor. Bees formed one of them, trees formed the second one, and swamp magically appeared to form the last one. Ava Kedavra. A green light came from Edward's wand before hitting one of the 4, but nothing happened. He was not surprised by this outcome as these guys' souls did not exist in their bodies. Now, it also seemed that they did not have any life force that anchors their souls to their bodies. The more immune these people were, the more excited Edward became. He looked at Frank and asked, "How did you previously deal with them?" "I trapped them in a place far away from the river, then the forest essentially took care of them." After pondering for a while, Edward once again used a spell. However, the 4 of them evaded so they were not hit. Unfortunately for them, they would hit by Hermione's body-locking charm. Then, their bodies completely froze. "It seems that they are not immune to magic." "Just unkillable," she muttered. Edward nodded his head before using the gouging charm and creating a wide and deep hole into the ground and dropping the 4 of them. Immediately afterward, without access to the river, their bodies turned into statues and they entered a state of suspended animation. "So, what idea did you get from them?" asked Hermione. "Their bodies are fused with the environment, so, although these guys have no mana or understanding of spell, they can still use spell-like abilities. If we study them, we might be able to create many nature-like spells, even create the concept of druids that can borrow power from nature," said Hermione with a twinkle in her eyes. "You're right, but I do not care about that. What I care about is those 2 that are made of honey and swamp, their bodies are completely made of elements," replied Edward. "You want to use them to further your study into elementalization?" "Yes," replied Edward. "One of the reasons that dragons are one of the most powerful species in our universe is because they are considered semi-elemental creatures. Every single cell in their bodies contained mana. I've tried to replicate this process, but even in my half-dragon form, man can only be stored in the tissues, no further than. Not to mention that my cells cannot generate mana like theirs. Additionally, I have theorized that Albion should have the ability to completely turn into a thunder elemental." Although he denied that fact and I could not find anything in his memories, I still believe in my theory. Hermione nodded her head before saying, "Elementalization might have a great impact on Aura Masters. Maybe it is the next step after elemental awakening." "That's a great idea. However, I'm thinking about something even better. What if we could use mana for the elementalization process? Turning our entire bodies into mana? Becoming pure energy life forms," said Hermione with a slight surprise. "If successful, the benefits would be endless. As pure mana life forms, our control over mana would be unparalleled compared to all magical species. This process can also help in quickly reaching higher tiers as arcanists." "That's exactly what I'm thinking. However, I still think it would be better if we could revert to our bodies of flesh, becoming existence between flesh and energy. After all, flesh life forms still have their advantages. Just the discovery of these 2 people made the trip to this world worthwhile." Edward wanted to quickly study these people, however, he knew that this was not the time, so he controlled his excitement. Then, he looked around with a bunch of people looking at him and Hermione with weird looks. Obviously, they have heard their conversations. Truth be told, all these people could not understand what they were talking about. Only Dr. Lilith had an inkling because of her background as a scientist. Nevertheless, these people still understood the fact both Edward and Hermione most likely possessed or has seen the mythical creature known as dragons. "We are just talking about a novel," said Edward without any embarrassment, while continuing his conversation with Hermione. "Have you noticed anything odd about how they were able to cast their abilities?" "Yes. They did not have or use any kind of mana," replied Hermione. "It seems that they were borrowing energy from the forest itself, similar to gate alchemy." That's what Edward thought as well, however, he was not completely sure. Afterward, the 2 chatted for a brief moment before stopping. They had a preliminary. Suddenly, Edward seemed to have sensed something. He waved his wand and a bee was attracted towards him. He looked at it with a frown. He then used the nature's voice spell to communicate to the bee. Does any of you know a German person with blonde hair, about 1.7 meters, with a mustache? It should be Prince Joachim, replied Lilith. He has been chasing after us from a submarine. Well, according to this bee, he is the one who released Aguirre and his men, tasking them to finding you guys and the arrowhead. In that case, we must hurry. The tree must not fall in the hands of the Germans. Edward had no opposition to this. So, after making sure that Aguirre and his men were sealed deeply underneath the ground, he left. He would return later and established a laboratory here to study these four. Then, the group headed to their destination. During the 2 days' voyage, Edward and Hermione enjoyed the beautiful sight together. She fell in love with Proxima, which was a wild jaguar that Frank adopted and raised. She wanted to raise one of her own. Meanwhile, Edward could see that Lilith and Frank were getting quite well. It could even be said to be falling in love. Soon, the group arrived at their destination. In front of them was a valley with tall walls forming an enclosure. On top of the walls, water fell down from another part of the river. After a quick observation, the group realized that the next step in finding the tree should be underwater. After searching, they discovered an ancient mechanism. After activating it, the water on the river seemed to have receded and an ancient ruin was discovered. The group understood that this mechanism was the arrowhead referred to when it said turning water into stone. Frank drove the boat inside the ruin and they saw a gigantic tree at least a few hundred meters in size. The tree looked dead, commented McGregor. There must be a way to activate, said Lilith, and Edward agreed with her. He was more and more interested in this tree. Normal trees do not grow to such a size, only magical trees. However, he could not find any hint of mana from this tree. After searching the ruins, the group found a mural depicting the origin of this tree. According to it, a broken-hearted warrior climbs to the highest peak and shot his arrow into the moon. From there, the moon learned real pain and began to weep. Where the tears fell grew a sacred tree he knew. See. Edward had a pondering look on his face after translating the mural. Legends or myths usually have some truths. So, based on this, there is the possibility that some creatures fell from the moon, and its essence became this magical tree. Or, the moon itself contained something that resulted in the creation of this tree. Unfortunately, he has no future knowledge regarding this world and cannot come up with an explanation. So, he decided to contact Morgana and have her survey the moon and see if she can find anything. There was an indentation on the mural, so the group placed the arrowhead inside. However, that did not work. Lilith quickly figured out that the solution to their problem is in Edward's previous translation, the part that said, to mend a broken heart. She realized that the arrowhead was in fact a heart, and after trying to break it into two, it was easily separated, revealing a small purple orb. She immediately placed the orb in the indentation, then, a magical scene occurred. Glowing purple lines came from the orb and spread throughout the entire tree. And everywhere it passed, the tree would become alive as petals rapidly grew on it. What a beautiful sight, said Hermione. Chapter 224 Ordinary Life. Edward was also fascinated by the beauty of this tree, but he quickly woke up to study it. He was more interested in how it functioned than its aesthetic. After a quick observation, he understood something. The purple orb allowed the tree to absorb a massive amount of lunar energy from the eclipse, which in turn activated the powers of the tree. After introducing gate alchemy to the Empire, many forms of energy were discovered, including lunar energy. However, so far, its proper function has not been discovered besides being used for basic alchemy. However, now, Edward has some speculation. Since the tree can heal, delay aging, and remove curses, lunar energy might have similar properties. After studying it, he might discover some application of lunar energy. After coming to a conclusion, Edward suddenly apparat to the top of the tree. Each trunk was large enough for him to stand and long enough for him to take a short walk. With his wand, he began to write ancient runes in the air. One thing he noticed since coming to this world is the major change that occurred to his arcane rune magic. For one, some spells could not work properly or at all. As for the ones that did, they required a tremendous amount of mana, especially compared to when he was back home. This is one of the reasons that he has been constantly using wandcraft magic. For the same spell, arcane rune magic required 3 to 10 times more mana. Edward was intrigued by this situation and wanted to know the reason. One theory he has is that this world is more restrictive to outsiders, and there might even be many hidden and unknown things that hide underneath the surface. And he was not the only one being restricted. Hermione's summoning talent was rendered useless as she could not sense any other dimensions out there. As for Edward's talent, he did not know whether there was any problem since his talent was more of a passive one. Unless in danger or encountering someone that can be dangerous to him, it will not activate. After seeing Edward's actions, Hermione understood his purpose, so she apparat close to him and also began to engrave runes in the air. The runes that they were engraving were to store lunar energy. They both knew that after the eclipse, the tree would wither and return to its dead state. On top of it all, the eclipse would not last long. However, with the energy of the runes, it should be fine for a few days. As predicted, once the lunar eclipse ended, the tree showed signs of withering. So, they quickly activated the runes to power it. Frank, you can use a petal to remove the curse on you, said Edward. As for you, Dr. Lilith, you can take as many as you want. 3 will be fine, replied Lilith. After taking the flower, Frank felt like a brand new person. It was as if he was given new life. Meanwhile, Edward was observing the entire process without missing anything. He witnessed how after the curse was lifted, Frank's soul returned to his soul space, once again becoming complete, albeit at the price of losing his mortality. It makes no sense, muttered Hermione. Indeed. How could a person function normally without a soul inside his body, added Edward. The Horcrux only allows one piece of the soul to be removed, and even then, there are many repercussions. Yet, he was completely fine without his entire soul. Whether it is Frank, Aguirre, and his conquistadors, they were anomalies that did not need a soul to function. They walked around and functioned while their souls were attached to the forest. This goes against many of the things that Edward or the Empire understood about the soul. As such, this fact further elevated the values of these 4 cursed individuals. After Frank was cured and Lilith received the prize for her expedition, Edward began his task of taking the tree away. He contacted Morgana. How is going up there? Master, many of the floating city has been stopped, malfunctioned, or running at its lowest capacity, including our energy system. Are the changes permanent? No, according to my analysis, things are slowly getting back to normal. In that case, that's fine. I need you to teleport this tree back to the city. Create an environment full of lunar energy and place it here. Morgana paused for a moment. That will take roughly 18 hours. His lisp twitched slightly after hearing this. He finally understood how bad the oppression of the city was. He nodded to her and said he could wait since the runes had absorbed enough energy to keep the tree in its pristine state. The problem of world suppression is more severe than anticipated. I should probably find a way to deal with it. After contacting Morgana, he reunited with the group. So, what's your plan after this? Asked Edward. I want to return to London, replied Lilith. Edward sighed after hearing this. During the journey, he has been trying to intrigue her with the power of magic. After all, she is an excellent scientist. Adding to that the fact that she is probably the protagonist of her own movie, she might be someone with great luck just like Harry Potter. As such, she would be a great asset to the Empire. Can I ask why? Can't you just read my mind? You told me not to invade your privacy. After thinking for a while, she said, I can probably guess a few things about the origins of you two. I'm all ear. First, you two are from the future, said Lilith. What makes you say that? I overheard you when you said that Doctor Who was not invented until 1960, said Lilith calmly. Based on this, I guess that the so-called magic might be an advanced form of science that the current time cannot understand. Edward laughed softly. You're not totally correct, but you're not wrong as well. Before Edward's intervention, magic in his universe was mostly based on mysticism or the occult. However, he has developed magic into a form of science with clear laws, rules, and regulations. In the Empire's era, magic can be described as the control of energy to change, shape, or bend reality. Through words, runes, or ceremonies, energy is used to create different effects. Something tells me that my origin is not the real reason you rejected my invitation, asked Edward. You're right. The real reason was the way you two treated Aguirre and his men, even Frank, said Lilith as she looked at Edward directly in the eyes. You were cold, logical, and calculated. In the process of finding the way their curses worked, you treated them as if they were nothing but lab rats. And from your and your wife's behavior, it is obvious that this is not the first time you treated humans live this way. I do not know for sure what the future you're from is like, but based on this, I can guess. It is probably a world where science or magic developed without any restraints of ethics or morality. Anything can be done for progress and advancement. Lilith paused as she took a deep breath. Honestly, I do not want to live in a dystopian world like this. I would prefer to continue my ordinary life. Edward sighed. You are correct. After that, he reached out his hand to give her a handshake. I wish you and Frank a happy life together. Thank you, said Lilith as she shook his hand as well. What about me? Asked McGregor. You too, McGregor. I hope you find someone that makes you happy. Do not let society's rules and expectations dictate your life and happiness. After all, in the end, they are all made up by people and are only valid because we as a collective accept them as such. McGregor felt these words contained some deep truth in them, so he nodded his head. Soon, Edward waved at them as they floated away in Frank's boat. He turned around and looked at Hermione. Something wrong? Did Lilith's words affect you? No, it's just that I never noticed these things that she said. Now that you realize it, how do you feel? It's not a big deal. In any world, you have to sacrifice something to attain other things, said Hermione. In the Empire, we have established a society that worshipped knowledge and pursued the truth. In return, it seems that we have to sacrifice a little bit of our humanity. Do you think this sacrifice is worth it? I do, replied Hermione without hesitation. When I think of all the good things that we have accomplished, and the things we'll be able to accomplish in the future, I think it's worth it. Edward nodded in agreement. As long as we do no completely forsaken the goodness in us, it is indeed worth it, FEC. Then, the two waited for the time Morgana needed to teleport the tree back to the floating city. However, right before that, they received a call from Snape and Lily. "What is it, Severus?" asked Edward as he looked at the small hologram in front of him. "The entire country of Egypt is surrounded by plagues that looked similar to the ones from the Bible because of a mummy priest that is most likely a Tier 4 individual," said Snape with his usually stoic face. "Plague? Mummy," muttered Edward as he suddenly thought of something. "Do you know the name of the priest?" "Imhotep. The mummy? This is the world of the mummy," thought Edward with a little surprise. Chapter 225 The Mummy. After telling Snape that he would be on his way, Edward began to think about the situation. He thought that he was in some other movie or book that he had never seen before, but now the mummy showed up. Such a situation could only mean two things: whatever movie that Dr. Houghton and Frank were in is a spin-off of the Mummy series, or this is a world where multiple universes are fused. If it is the former, then it should be fine. However, if it is the latter, this universe should have many surprises. After coming to this conclusion, Edward closed his eyes and entered his mind palace. He found himself in a massive library with countless books. There was so much of it that a small planet could probably be filled with these books. Edward was proud of the size of this library. This was a display of the vast knowledge he has acquired in his life. Although he could change his mind palace to resemble that of a computer to make things easier, he did not do so. With a wave of his hand, entire sections of the library rapidly moved until it stopped into one particular section labeled, Earth's Memory. Then, with his thought, a book labeled, The Mummy, came into his hand. He reviewed the entire book. Based on his memories, Edward knew that there were more than 5 Mummies movies: the original trilogy, the reboot in 2017, and the spin-off of The Scorpion King, which had a few movies. Unfortunately, he only saw the trilogy. As for the others, besides seeing a few trailers and glancing at a few passing information online, he did not know much. After opening his eyes, Edward said with a serious face, "This world is not as weak as we previously believed." "Did you find something?" asked Hermione. "Yes, this world has gods, and many of them." After reviewing his memories, Edward knew that at least 3 gods showed up in the Mummy trilogy: Osiris, Anubis, and Set. The first movie was relatively tame and did not show much, but in the second movie, it is revealed that both the Scorpion King and the High Priest Imhotep received their powers from the god, Anubis. When Edward first saw the movie, he did not think much about it. However, as he reviewed things now in the real world from his current perspective, he saw many issues that were not stated or obvious. The second movie touched on things like fate and destiny when it came to the O'Connells and their child, Alex. However, Edward saw more. He could see that the final battle of the movie between Rick, the Scorpion King, and Imhotep might actually be a battle between Anubis and Osiris. In the final battle, Rick discovered a mirror that showed that the scepter that his brother-in-law Jonathan carried all along with him was the spear of Osiris, capable of killing monsters like the Scorpion King. In the movie, the appearance of the scepter is shown constantly as it travels all over the world until it reached its final destination through a series of coincidences led by Jonathan's greed. As a movie watcher, Edward remembered how he complained that the scepter plot was lazy writing and not properly explained. Although he understood that the writers were trying to show the power of destiny and it was still bad writing to him. However, now, he speculated that this was not destiny but the power of Osiris guiding his chosen champions. Given that they are both gods related to the underworld, could it be that Anubis revolted against his father Osiris and tried to usurp complete control of the underworld? Edward quickly shook his head to remove these distracting thoughts. All of these were his conjectures and have no real substantial evidence to back them up. Nevertheless, he decided to be careful and check the situation of the gods in this world. Then, Edward looked at the Tears of the Moon. In the mural at the entrance, there is a story of a warrior who shot the moon, then it learned pain and cried. The tears then became this sacred tree. At first, Edward thought that some creature or thing felt from the moon. The mural was the way that the ancient people of the Pukamikuna tribe viewed the event and described it. However, now, he had some doubts. If gods really existed in this world, there is a chance that some moon god or goddess was injured and when its divine power fell to earth, it created this tree. If some, this tree would be more valuable than previously anticipated. Thinking about this, he quickly contacted Morgana. Control a few golems and sent them here. Study the tree in depth before transporting it back to the city. Immediately, he told her about some of his guesses and theories. Then, Edward left. Since he could not wait for Morgana to arrive, he closed the entrance to the tree and placed a few basic hiding enchantments in the surroundings to prevent others from finding this location. Then, he apparat to Egypt with Hermione. Unfortunately for them, the space was blocked, preventing them from instantly arriving at their destiny. A powerful curse enveloped the entire country and even passively blocked the space. In the end, Edward and Hermione had to fly to their destination. They used mana crystals to replenish their mana so that they could arrive at the destination at the fastest speed. Cairo, Egypt. Edward looked at the sky that was all dark despite the fact it was the afternoon. He knew that Imhotep's curses had already begun, and with time, he grew stronger. Currently, he was only Tier 2 while the mummy was Tier 3. and once he was in the desert, he could use Tier 4 powers. So, he rushed to the hotel where Snape and Lily were located with the main protagonists of The Mummy, Rick O'Connell, Evelyn, and Jonathan Carnahan. "What's the situation?" asked Edward directly. "These reckless people woke up a cursed mummy that has been sleeping for thousands of years. Right now, the creature needs to kill and absorb the life of the people who opened the chests that contained his lover's remains," said Snape. "How many of the Americans are still alive?" asked Edward. Snape was surprised at how he knew about the Americans. However, by now, he was used to the Emperor having mysterious and unpredictable means. "Only one of them is dead." "What about the Egyptologist?" As soon as his words finished, he heard a scream outside. Edward and the other people rushed to the window. They saw a man with a hood standing in front of a dried corpse with a black book in his hand. He turned around showing his disgusting face with holes in his cheeks. He opened his mouth and countless flies flew from his mouth, biting the people around him. "We're too late, he already got the Book of the Dead," said Edward as he looked at the book in Imhotep's hand with desire. "Plus, his power has increased again with the release of a new curse." "What's our next step of action?" asked Lily. Edward looked at her and he gave her a weird look. She had 2 guns in her hand and a look of excitement flashed across her eyes. Although he did not know what made the usually serious Lily act this way, he knew that this was not the time. "We need to return to the Hamunaptra and acquire the Book of Amun-Ra. With it, I should be able to control Imhotep or weaken his power." He then looked at the 3 protagonists who were looking at him wondering who was this guy that seemed to be the boss of the 2 powerful wizards that they met. Edward walked to O'Connell. "Let me see your hand." For some reason, Rick showed his hand on instinct. However, he soon regretted it. However, it was too later as Edward was looking at a tattoo on his right hand. Edward knew that this tattoo represented the fact that he was part of the Medjai, a secret group tasked with guarding Imhotep's tombs for thousands of years and preventing his resurrection. He also knew that it was this tattoo that guided him to discover the true use of the scepter that turned into the spear of Osiris and killed the Scorpion King. "Take these 3 and we will fly to Hamunaptra under the cover of the darkness." Each of them needed to carry 1 person with the exception of Hermione. As soon Edward said these words, Snape rushed to be O'Connell's carrier as he gave the latter a deep stare as if he wanted to kill him. "Fewn. What's wrong with him?" asked Hermione. "He's been acting like that ever since I said Rick was handsome," replied Lily with a sigh. "Well, he is indeed handsome," replied Edward. "That kind of ruggedness, heroic and gunslinging charm is very attractive to many women. Anyway, he's not more handsome than me, right?" "Of course, my dear, in my eyes, you're the most handsome man in existence," replied Hermione as she caressed his hair. "I will ignore that slight pause before your answer." Edward walked next to Jonathan and held him by the back of his shirt. Then, he turned into a shadowy figure as he flew into the sky. The others followed him as Snape carried Rick and Lily carried Evelyn.